start going through the, oh, that's good to know. Gonna start going through the intros here. Well, my stuff works, of course. All right, here we go.
Scott,
Greetings. Yeah.
actually, before we get going, I just wanted to let everyone know that if there's anyone here who wants the professional development cert, to just let me know, drop your name in the chat, and we can get you your cert hopefully by the end of the week. So if anyone has my contact information, I'll put it in the chat for everyone. But please just let me know if you'd like a cert for your professional development hours, because this will count as 4 credit hours. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, Scott.
You're good. I got someone who didn't get the invite link or it didn't work. So just give me a second to send it to him real quick.
Scott, if you get any more of those, you can just send them to me and I'll get that forwarded to them. I've been doing that for the last 10 minutes or so. It's pretty cool.
I'll forward it over right now, Elizabeth.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, and we're back. Greetings, everyone. Welcome. This is the Low Impact Development Training annually done by the Sonoma-Mendocino Municipal Stormwater Co-Permitting Group. This consists of all the way from Rohnert Park to Ukiah, City of Santa Rosa, Sebastopol, City of Healdsburg, City of Cotati, City of Cloverdale, Sonoma County, Sonoma Water, Town of Windsor. We're all together helping bring this information to everyone. They're all on the call. You might hear from most of us. You might hear from just a few of us. It's going to be a good day. And the agenda we're going to start with is, this is how it's going to be kind of broken down. We're going to have an introduction. We're going to go over previous trainings. That's actually going to happen after the overview of the manual and LID efficacy. We're going to do a discussion on LID submittals. We're going to do a case study with Flannery. We're going to do another panel discussion that's construction and maintenance kind of focused. And then we're going to do frequently asked questions. It's a whole form that we're putting together that we want to introduce to everyone and hopefully get some feedback. And then at the end, there's going to be questions and open discussion. All right. And just some reminders, please remain muted during the presentation and hold questions until prompted. Feel free to go through the chat or raise your hand. If it seems pertinent, we'll answer it then. If not, we're just going to hold questions to another time. And then again, this meeting is being recorded. So that's all I have in the reminders. And we're basically going to just kind of jump right into it here. All right, well. Welcome to our presentation. Its theme of this presentation is Form Follows Function in the realm of low impact development in Sonoma County. In this first slide I have here, we showcase a compelling visual comparison of 2 stream beds, each representing a different approach to land development. On your one side, we observe a stream bed heavily impacted by conventional development practices. That's your high impact developments, which often results in increased stormwater runoff, erosion, and sedimentation. These impacts adversely affect the water quality, the aquatic habitats, underscoring the challenges of traditional development. Conversely, the image here on the right shows minimally impacted stream beds, and this exemplifies the potential of low impact development and LID, how it integrates environmentally sustainable practices into development, prioritizing the preservation and utilization of natural features to manage stormwater. This approach maintains the natural hydrological cycle, thereby reducing the detrimental effects on our water bodies. As we progress through our presentation, we will delve deeper into the concept of Form Follows Function and its pivotal role in the design and implementation of low-impact development strategies. This principle underscores the importance of shaping structures and systems based on their intended function or purpose. And in the context of LID, this means designing urban areas and developments that align with nature, promoting sustainable water management practices. Through this presentation and this journey, we will encompass various facets of low-impact development, illustrating how this approach can pave the way for a more sustainable and environmentally friendly future in Sonoma County. So let's start this exploration of integrating human and natural environments through thoughtful and sustainable design. And how I want to kick that off is, well, does it work? We've been hearing about a lot of low impact development and how it's a requirement here and there, but is there research that shows that it works? And yes, there is. Research across the globe confirms the efficacy of low impact development practices. These studies, they consistently show that LID's significant role in the diminishing of stormwater runoff and enhancing the quality of water that sustains us. It's not just about managing water more effectively. It's about ensuring that the water which flows into our streams and rivers carries fewer pollutants, protecting the ecosystems that depend on these water sources. And through this research, we've seen reductions in both the volume and the speed of runoff, leading to less erosion and sedimentation. This is a clear indication that integrating LID into our urban planning is not just beneficial, but necessary. And in the following slides, we're going to delve a little deeper into the mechanisms of LID and some of the research that backs up its success. This slide right here, a lot of these are from the EPA's website. They have a lot of great information there, and these are peer-reviewed research articles that kind of go right into the nuts and bolts on how these LID features work. I recommend going to the EPA's website or just searching like Google Scholar for how LID works, because there's a lot of great information out there that shows the benefits. So how does it work? Let's focus now on outlining the core benefits of low impact development that we'll explore today. We're going to discuss how LID leads to significant savings in stormwater treatment and energy. I'm going to examine its cost effectiveness compared to traditional gray infrastructure, and I'm going to delve into its role in reducing emissions and highlight the broad environmental challenges it provides. Each of these points I'm going to unpack, and I'm going to unpack them in the following slides, trying to provide a clear picture of LID's roles in sustainable urban development. And now we're going to start with treatment savings with low impact development. All right, in today's world where ecological mindfulness blends with fiscal prudence, low impact development emerges as an innovative solution. This approach, guided by the principle of form follows function, not only advocates for environmental preservation, but also presents substantial economic benefits. LID's strategic use of natural processes for stormwater management significantly cuts down expenses related to wastewater treatment and infrastructure development. Compared to your traditional gray infrastructure, LID reduces the need for expensive engineered stormwater management systems by incorporating permeable pavements, green roofs, rain gardens, bioswales. LID diminishes surface runoff, thus lowering the strain and cost on municipal stormwater systems. These savings, they manifest in reduced construction, maintenance, and operational costs, offering a financially viable and sustainable alternative that relieves our communities of heavy financial burdens while protecting our environment. Just not the cost savings, there's also energy savings. And what do I mean by energy savings? Well, low impact development is reshaping urban planning. With its emphasis on energy efficiency and sustainable practices, at its core, it minimizes the reliance on energy-intensive stormwater pumping and conveyance systems, setting a new standard compared to your traditional gray infrastructure. This reduction in energy use for stormwater management is also just the beginning. One of its most significant benefits is its role in mitigating sometimes the urban heat island effect by integrating features like green roofs and permeable pavements. LID, it reduces the absorption and retention of heat in urban areas. These elements not only cool the immediate environment, but it also decreases the surrounding air temperature, leading to substantial reductions in the energy needed for cooling buildings. Moreover, LID's use of trees and vegetation creates natural shade, further lowering the temperature and reducing the demand for both cooling in summer and heating in winter. This natural shading, coupled with the cooling effects of green spaces, significantly cuts down energy consumption related to heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. Furthermore, LID enhances local microclimates. By incorporating natural elements and reducing impervious surfaces, LID promotes better air circulation and temperature regulation. This improvement in microclimates contributes to a more comfortable urban environment and in reducing our reliance on artificial climate control systems and hence the associated energy costs. In summary, the LID not only provides a sustainable alternative to conventional stormwater management, but it also offers the holistic solution for energy conservation. By reducing the need for energy-intensive infrastructure, mitigating the heat island effect, and providing natural shade and improving microclimates, LID proves to be an intelligent choice for urban development, benefiting our budget and planets alike. And now, cost compared to gray infrastructure. Well, let's get into why low LID isn't just an environmentally conscious choice, but it's also a financially good one, especially when compared to your traditional gray infrastructure. And when we talk about construction costs, LID practices like bioretention basins, vegetated swales, permeable pavements, they typically require less upfront investment. This is not only because they often use less expensive and locally sourced materials, but also because they can be easily integrated into existing landscapes, reducing the need for costly overhauls. I've seen examples where the initial cost of LID implementations were significantly lower than those of conventional methods. But even moving on to long-term maintenance, the natural self-sustaining design of LID means it generally requires less upkeep than gray infrastructure. Think about it. A rain garden or a green roof, once established, needs minimal maintenance compared to the ongoing repairs and replacements needed for concrete pipes and stormwater basins. This translates to substantial savings over time. And not just savings there, but let's talk about property values, right? LID doesn't just save money, it makes spaces more attractive. Green spaces, improved water quality. These features, they make urban areas more desirable, driving up property values. This not only benefits property owners, but can also lead to tax revenues for cities. Lastly, compliance with environmental regulations is a big deal. With stricter stormwater management rules coming into play, LID offers a cost-effective way to comply. This means avoiding potential fines and penalties, which can be quite hefty. Into some environmental benefits of low impact development, well, it exemplifies the principle that form follows function. In its approach to the environmental stewardship, they're designed to harmonize with nature. LID, it transforms urban planning by enhancing stormwater management in a way that is both aesthetically pleasing and functionally effective. The key lies in allowing water to naturally infiltrate the soil, thereby reducing runoff and pollution. A clear instance where the design, the form, directly complements its purpose, the function. So take, for instance, features like rain gardens and permeable pavements. These aren't just efficient solutions for stormwater management, they're also aesthetic elements that enhance urban landscapes. They embody the concept of form follows function by serving dual roles, managing water effectively, while also adding visual appeal and fostering biodiversity. These features, they create habitats for wildlife and support a diverse range of flora and fauna, integrating nature into our urban fabric. Moreover, LID, they address, like I said earlier, the urban heat island effect. They integrate natural elements into cityscapes. The LID help makes our cities cooler and more livable. And this is a perfect example of how functional design can lead to greater comfort and environmental benefits. In essence, LID, it's just more than a mere development strategy. It's a commitment to a sustainable future, where the form of our urban spaces is intrinsically linked to their ecological function. It's about creating environments that not only serve their intended purpose, but do so in a way that respects and enhances our natural world. But I can go on about how great LIDs are, but I need to, and everyone else needs to, we need to understand the limitations of our LID features. So let's get into the nuanced world of low impact development limitations. All right. So while LID offers a myriad of benefits, and it's imperative that we understand and address its challenges to fully leverage its potential. So in these upcoming slides, I'm going to explore key aspects such as specialized maintenance requirements of LID features, the intricacies involved in their design and implementation, and the considerations for space constraints in urban settings. We'll also discuss initial cost factors and the critical role of public perception and acceptance in the successful integration of our LID practices. Each of these elements we have here present unique challenges, but they also offer opportunities for innovation and improvement. As we navigate through these topics, our focus will be on uncovering effective strategies that can help us overcome these hurdles, ensuring that LID continues to be a viable and appealing choice for creating sustainable and resilient urban environments. So a big one that's always out there is the focus on maintenance. A poorly maintained LID feature is not going to work well, and the success of it is crucial to recognize that it's not just routine upkeep. LID maintenance demands regular specialized attention, distinct from traditional practices, and carries its own set of cost implications. This level of care is vital. Neglecting it can lead to problems like clogged filtration systems, which severely undercut the ecological efficiency of these systems. Today, we're not just examining the maintenance challenges and their impact on LID functionality, we're also exploring effective solutions to uphold the integrity and performance of LID installations. We're going to have a whole panel discussion later. It's going to go over the operation and maintenance and how important and vital it is for these systems to be maintained in the long term. And there's always limitations of LIDs and the design and implementation challenges. Designing and implementing low impact development has its own challenges. From integrating with current infrastructure to navigating the maze of regulation and policies, each step requires careful consideration. So there's site-specific conditions, there's knowledge gaps, there's financial constraints, and there's need for long-term planning and coordination further complicate these LID projects. We're going to discuss how these factors can inhibit LID practices and what measures can be taken to overcome these hurdles for a more sustainable future. Our first limitation here is navigating space constraints. Space constraints in dense urban environments, they pose significant challenges to low impact development. Property boundaries, ownership issues, zoning regulations can all limit the implementation of LID features. Retrofitting LID into existing landscapes often requires innovative, multifunctional designs to maximize the limited space we have. Today, we address how to navigate these constraints, ensuring that LID can be part of our urban ecosystem, even where space is at a premium. And as cost-effective LID can be, it can also have initial cost concerns. The initial costs associated with low impact can be a barrier to its adaptation. Customized designs, infrastructure modifications, and specialized materials and plant selections contribute to these upfront investments. Additionally, the need for that trained labor and potential economic incentives or returns on investments must be considered. And we'll explore these financial concerns, emphasizing the long-term value of LID brings through its sustainable practices and the potential for cost recovery over time. And that was kind of my beginning section. That was an overview of benefits of LID and some of its limitations. I'm going to kind of stop sharing my screen right now, and Ashley's going to be introduced here. Ashley Cotter, she's with the City of Rohnert Park as well. And she's going to come and present what was on previous trainings.
Good morning. This is going to be a relatively quick run through. Let's go ahead and share. Okay. Can everyone see the screen? 2022 LID training overview. Alrighty, so this is, like I said, going to be a very
We
brief.
can't see it, Ashley.
Oh, you can't see it. Okay.
I was in a weird view.
Well, that's fine. Okay, now can you guys see it?
Nope.
Oh, wonderful. Love that. Practiced yesterday.
It was sharing, and then, oh, here we go. There we go.
Still muted, Ashley.
Oh gosh, okay. Technical difficulties up the wazoo. This is going to be very brief, just a 2022 overview of what you guys did last year because there is a lot of value in what you guys discussed. So there was a very informational planting and soils presentation. Alyssa Overton from City of Sebastopol and Elizabeth Carragay from Town of Windsor provided a presentation on vegetation and soils. And really the meat and potatoes of that was that plant selection and design is really important and really determines the success for a low impact development. And design can sometimes be at odds with function. So presenting safety concerns for pedestrians while functional from a stormwater perspective, there are other considerations to keep in mind. So really just kind of addressing LID in a holistic way, trying to remember that it's important that it works for everyone. They also went over Appendix F, the approved plant list, and put together this wonderful graph and really emphasized that plants do the majority of the work in the LID. They are the choice of plants and placement of plants in the LID feature are absolutely critical. And so what this goes over are the different zones and respective water capacity to aid in plant selection. So when you're going through and developing your design, it's important to really take into consideration where you want to put those plants and how they're going to function because it will impact the efficacy of your LID feature. It also goes over planting zones. And so understanding the planting zones will help you determine your plant selection. Elizabeth and Alyssa provided some great examples on maintenance and situations in which maintenance was neglected and considerations to make during design. And that also impacts your plant selection as well. So maintenance would include like weeding, cleaning out leaf debris and trash, and making sure your splash diverters are where they're supposed to be. So that is critical as well. Again, just to make sure that your LID functions the way it's supposed to. And then another thing they touched on was the importance of the consistent use of terminology. They pointed out a couple things where like grassy swales and bioswales are kind of used interchangeably, but they actually do have different features that really differentiate them. So utilizing the correct terminology indicates what feature you're actually planning on utilizing during design and also has maintenance implications and whatnot. So making sure to utilize the correct terminology when submitting your design is important. And then they also gave this really great graph on soil breakdown, and it really the kind of soil depends on infiltration. So around here we do have a lot of clay soil, so the native soils in Sonoma County usually do need to be replaced, but they also aren't checked prior to construction, so that was interesting. And they also provided some more information on soils about like how everything kind of comes together. And explained how the soil is utilizing a USDA classification, as well as hydrologic soil groups. And your engineer will look up a soil that will likely exist in the LID. However, the USDA maps are actually utilized for agriculture and crops. So they're not really utilized for LID infiltration. So the map will provide an approximation, but not anything site specific. And they also did explain that there is a likelihood that when you get into construction, the soil will look different in construction than in the soil study. So Elizabeth recommended that if you do have geotechnical reports, to ask for that. And you can also ask that they provide a percentage of soil so that you can kind of match it to USDA classification. So that's helpful. And then the types of soils and LID bioswales. So first you've got your structural soils, and the structural soil is usually installed above the native soil when native soil can't be used, and structural is actually an engineering soil. And there is construction sediment that shouldn't contaminate, so it's really important to keep that protected. structural soil is well graded, medium and fine sand, and mixed with a certain amount of organics with plants that can grow in it. And your bioswale soil mix is much finer than structural soil. And then you've got your topsoil, which sometimes you don't actually need. That's kind of that was interesting. And also it stressed the importance of mulch, which should be used in the beginning to help with weed control. So emphasis on mulch, not bark. Mulch protects the soil from erosion and traps particulate pollution, reduces water flow and velocity with plants and rocks. Arbor mulch is the best, and again, don't use bark. Also, they emphasize the timing of bioswale construction, which is so important. So ideally, the bioswale should be constructed at the very end because they don't want any of those construction contamination to get into the bioswales. If it's installed last, you don't necessarily have to test for contamination, but if it's installed early, then it will have to be tested before you're done in order to confirm that there is no contamination. So you can definitely protect your bioswale soils with geofabric unless it's dug in. And then they also had a very interesting panel discussion on submittals, which is like kind of somewhat like what we're going to do this year. And they just reviewed common problems with submittals and reviewed the checklist before submitting your LID submittal, and also made sure to note that the checklist is not comprehensive. So make sure to review your manual, whatever manual you're using, before submitting. And also be sure to check off which manual you're using. And make sure to have maintenance considerations before or during plan review and looking at instruments required for maintenance. Just make sure that you ask your program manager for any exemptions before submittal, such as any BMP over 1 and 2 or below 1 and 2. So you will need an exemption to do priority groups 3, 4, 5, and 6. Let's see, again, just tips and tricks for a correct submittal. Just consistency is absolutely key. Make sure that your submittal has all of its components. Everything is spelled out in the narrative. They will indicate that things are in the narrative and you go back and review. It's actually not in the narrative. So that can really slow down your timing to get your LID design approved. Use the LID calculator as much as you can. The city of Santa Rosa is pretty specific. They will not approve anything that is not using the LID calculator. The calculator is actually required per the LID manual. So alternative calculations will require additional review with an additional narrative. So the calculator really does provide a key level of consistency. And they also had some really information about how submittals are reviewed from initial to final. So if you guys, that section interests you, I would encourage you to watch the training. And then Heaven Moore also presented on compliance and some more FAQs for the 2022 training. And so again, that is just a really informational training because we will be touching on some subjects today, but not all. So if any of those sections really interest you or feel that they would be applicable to you, the link is here, and I can also drop the link in the chat for everyone. And that's it.
Great, thank you, Ashley. And I just want to piggyback on that. That's why we did this section, just because there's so much great information from last year's training. There's even another training before that year, and even one more before that year. And it's just each of those trainings all have great information. Of course, there's going to be overlap because we're still using the same manual. And if there is overlap, that's because these are the same problems we're seeing year after year. So the overlap is just to kind of hammer the message home that these are things that we need to improve on. I'm going to share back my screen.
Hey,
Let me
Scott,
know if it's up. Yep.
there's 2 questions in the chat. Do you want to answer those now or do you want to wait?
Let's see. Do people
So-
have an answer for them, or?
Well, Karen wants to know what's the difference between LID and quell gardening.
I can answer that for you, Scott.
Oh, thanks.
So LID, it deals with stormwater, urban runoff, recharging the aquifer, putting the water back into the soil. Quell is qualified water efficient landscaping. So that deals with water usage.
And then
Is
I see
that-
Peter. Okay. And then Peter said organics degrade over time. Do these bioswales need to be refreshed from time to time? How and when? Does anyone want to speak to that right now?
I can speak to that. This is Elizabeth. Yes, of course, they need to be refreshed once in a while. The organics really are to hold the moisture in. So if organics are gone, you of course want to get them put back in to help hold the moisture. They do slow the water down a little bit, but the plants really are for that. So as needed, and if you find that there's a lot of sediment built up, you'll want to get the sediment out before you refresh it with the organics. So we usually check it a couple times a year to make sure it looks good, and that's as often as I would probably check it.
What I'm talking about is the organics in the soil mix, not the ones that are growing on top.
Oh, like in the bioswale mix and all of that.
Yes, because I have experience with my own vegetable garden. I constantly have to refresh it and dig it in.
You know, the cost of replacing that soil can be very expensive. So we've
Yeah.
been going by when it's clogged, then we have to change it out. So I would say that's it depends on how your plants are doing. If your plants are doing well, I wouldn't worry about it until the soil is beginning to get clogged up. A lot of times you can just replace the top few inches, and then that keeps the costs down, and it replaces it with some of the organics and more permeable material.
All right,
Uh,
thank you.
Morning, this is Heaven Moore with the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. Sorry to be joining in the conversation a little bit late. But I just wanted to add a little bit of perspective to that question posed, which is, yes, it is possible that at some point the feature could reach a useful life, but unlike a vegetable garden, these features, because they're in the location where they have continual stormwater inflow into them, a lot of the things that we look at as pollutants and are concerns when they're in receiving waters, like nutrients, actually serve as inputs into that natural system and into the planting media there. And so when we look at data for LID features that have been in place, around the world, we see that they don't have the same type of annual replacement or amendment requirement like a vegetable garden would, where there's a high production plants without other input.
And I just add a little context on that, Pete. I think I appreciate your question because this is really what this LID is training about for the rest of you on the call, is we do want to have you engaged in asking questions. That's what we're all going to get more out of. I would say from a maintenance standpoint, what we'd be looking for is making sure that those infiltration rates are still being met. And that'll be our first indicator. However, if you think about some of these features, they do have high flow bypasses, and it is conceivable that if we had concerns, we could potentially sample. And should we find that it's not treating water quality to the original design, or that doesn't meet basin plan objectives, that we might require that to be replaced. So yes, as we get more sophisticated and more knowledgeable about these features, those potentially will need to be replaced or reconditioned, depending on, how much it's taking and where it's been placed.
All right, thank you.
Great. Thank you for contributing. All right, and yeah, keep the questions coming. Again, I would rather take slides away if we run out of time to answer some questions than not hear from everybody. So
Scott, I'll
Yep.
take this Flannery with City of Santa Rosa. I'll take the calculator question. So knowing that we are coming up on a full permit renewal and that's going to have pretty substantially different or changes from our current permit, The co-permittees, we aren't intending to update the calculator before we get that new permit. When we do get that new permit, we're expecting to have to do a pretty extensive overhaul of the LID manual. And with that, we're going to address the limitations on the calculator. So right now, the co-permittee's intent is to, with that next iteration, there'll still be some version of a calculator, but we're also going to be much more transparent about the calculations that we're using and allow and expect to be used. That way, engineers can, on sites that are specific, or you're operating with treatment trains, or there's nuances to the site, you'll also be able to produce your own calculations when it doesn't fit in our little toolbox that we create. So that's our intent, and you aren't going to be seeing it before we get the new permit renewal, because we'll need that permit renewal to do the manual revision.
I really appreciate the transparency of your calculations, because as a professional who's legal, liable, and responsible, or licensed, legal, and liable, and I don't even know what the calculations are doing. It's scary,
Agreed.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Flannery. All right, and I think that answered all the questions, so we will jump right back in. This next section is going to be specifically on our manual. And here it is. This is the Stormwater Low Impact Development Technical Design Manual. It can be found on the City of Santa Rosa's website. Like we said, make sure you're writing what manual you are using on your submittals, so we know if you're using the most up-to-date one. This one's been out for a while, so most likely we all are. But again, it's good to be clear on that. Okay, so as we go further into this journey of sustainable development, let's focus on the cornerstone of our practice, this Stormwater Development Design Manual. This manual, it's an essential tool crafted to improve how we approach stormwater. It's more than guidelines, it's an expression of our commitment to environmental stewardship. Here lies a comprehensive compilation of strategies and techniques designed to mitigate urban stormwater impacts effectively. By adhering to these principles, we not only comply with regulatory standards, but also contribute to the creation of resilient, water-wise landscapes that benefit our communities for generations to come. So what does the manual start with? It has its own goals for sustainable development. So we shift to the core ambitions of this stormwater low impact development design manual. It anchors our efforts in sustainable development. This manual sets forth the strategic framework designed to uphold the quality and integrity of our water bodies. It aims to mitigate the adverse effects of stormwater runoff by preserving the biological integrity of aquatic ecosystems. The key aspect is the management of impervious surfaces, steering new developments towards a natural water balance through infiltration, evapotranspiration, and stormwater capture and reuse. Furthermore, we commit to the reduction of pollutant loadings, addressing contaminants and contaminants from hard surfaces. This is achieved through a blend of source control, best management practices, BMPs, the most famous word of them all, and innovative LID planning and design strategies coupled with treatment control BMPs. The manual guides the selection and maintenance of these BMPs, ensuring that they're aptly chosen, designed, and sustained over time. It emphasizes hydro modification control to maintain post-development hydrology, ensuring that our interventions are as unobtrusive as possible to the natural environment, while also preventing the creation of habitats conducive to vectors. In essence, the goals articulated in this manual encapsulate our proactive stance towards a sustainable future, one where development and nature exist in a state of balanced coexistence. And the manual, what it starts off with is understanding our project triggers. So it's crucial to grasp the project triggers, the specific conditions under which LID requirements are activated. The manual, it outlines that every parcel within the development already improved or undergoing alteration falls within our purview. Improved parcels signify areas previously developed and distinguishes them from untouched land. Yet, our responsibility extends beyond the site's confines, encompassing associated public improvements too. This broad scope covers essential off-site work, like trenching for utilities and subsequent repaving, integral to the project's infrastructure. These tasks, while potentially situated on existing public roadways, are integral to assessing the project's full impact on stormwater management. The manual, it clarifies the treatment of gravel on site. Historically, laid gravel is considered pervious, preserving the land's natural infiltration capacity, unless it's proven otherwise. But conversely, gravel that's introduced as part of a new development is treated as impervious by default, unless there's documented evidence to attest to its permeability. In essence, understanding these triggers is pivotal in applying LID principles effectively. So it ensures that our development strategies holistically consider the project's total impact on stormwater runoff and hydrological sustainability. And the big one is this slide right here. It's a nice flow chart. It brings our attention to the critical aspect of low impact development in this manual, the 10,000 square feet impervious surface trigger. This key component is illustrated in this flow chart from the manual, providing a clear guide on how to determine the extent of stormwater management features required for a project. When a development proposes an addition or replacement of 10,000 square feet or more of impervious surfaces, it triggers specific LID requirements. These requirements include permanent water quality treatment, delta volume capture, and potentially hydromodification control measures. It necessitates the submission of a stormwater LID determination worksheet. As detailed in the appendixes, this worksheet is a vital tool, guiding us through the process to ensure all necessary LID elements are correctly incorporated. It's also important to note that even projects deemed exempt based on initial evaluation may still need to implement permanent stormwater quality features. This could be the result of other environmental permit processes that come into play. The level of treatment and retention required is also unique to each project and is further defined in the tables provided in this manual. This flow chart is not just a diagram, it's a decision-making tool that ensures all projects, irrespective of their size, address their impact on stormwater runoff effectively. It underscores our commitment again to proactive and responsible approach to managing our urban landscapes. So I mentioned exemptions earlier. Well, what are the exemptions that we can get from this manual? So this slide right here, I'm going to introduce 3 such exemptions. We got your routine maintenance, your emergency activities, and your public utility projects. And these exemptions play a pivotal role in practical urban management and development. First, we're going to discuss routine maintenance, then emergency activities, and lastly, public utility projects. So we begin with routine maintenance in the context of low impact development. This term, it covers essential upkeep tasks, including overlays, resurfacing, or road pavement structural section This includes overlays and resurfacing, and it encompasses trenching and patching activities, as well as re-roofing projects. To classify as routine maintenance, these activities must maintain the status quo regarding the site's lines, grades, and hydraulic capacity. Even minor alterations are restricted, with changes to line or grade limited to 0.20 feet or less to ensure original configurations are preserved. Furthermore, the replacement of existing pedestrian ramps to comply with current American with Disabilities Act requirements also falls under routine maintenance. Understanding this definition helps us differentiate between the upkeep and the more extensive modifications that might trigger additional LID requirements. And then next one is emergency activities. Well, what's classified as emergency activities? It's important to understand that how they differ from routine maintenance. While routine maintenance activities are pivotal for preserving the current state of infrastructure, emergency activities are a distinct category, often necessitated by immediate needs for public health and safety. These emergency activities are recognized by the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board as essential actions taken to safeguard the public well-being. For example, they might include urgent repairs to public utilities like sewer or water systems. It's important to note that such projects are strictly limited to the scope necessary for addressing the immediate emergency. They should not include any additional street or road developments beyond what is essential to rectify construction impacts on existing roadways. Understanding these distinctions between routine maintenance and emergency activities, it helps ensure that necessary urgent interventions are carried out effectively, while still aligning with our overarching commitment to sustainable development and environmental protection. It's a delicate balance between responding to immediate public needs and maintaining the integrity of our LID initiatives. And our last exemption that we come up to are public utility projects. This specific exemption is tailored for projects that are focused exclusively on installing or reinstalling essential public utilities, such as sewer and water lines. And it's important to highlight that to qualify for this exemption, these projects must not extend beyond the necessary scope. What does this mean? It means they should not encompass any additional street or road developments or redevelopment activities. The only exception that is allowed is the paving work required to rectify the impacts of construction on these existing roadways. So this precise delineation ensures that while vital utility services are maintained or upgraded, the project's footprint remains as minimal as possible, adhering to these principles. So understanding this exemption, it's crucial for planners and developers as it shows the boundaries within which utility projects can operate without triggering broader LID requirements. It's a fine line that balances the need for essential infrastructure upgrades with the commitment to minimizing environmental impact while preserving the natural hydrological balance in our urban landscapes. And those are the three exemptions in the manual. The manual has these great tables, these great flow charts. It has great details if you want to read through all of them, but these flow charts and these tables also help us figure out other things. So these slides, they present the Chapter 2 project trigger tables from the manual. This first slide is for sites that are under 1 acre of new or replaced impervious surfaces. This is a tool designed to help understand LID requirements for various project scenarios. This is a detailed matrix. It outlines that specific BMPs needed based on the tributary area's description. So here's how it works. For areas with both existing and new or replaced impervious surfaces, treatment is mandatory, and compliance with state mandated trash capture requirements is non-negotiable. Capturing debris 100 microns in diameter and larger is essential. And if the tributary area consists solely of new or replaced impervious surfaces, then 100% volume capture or a combination of delta volume capture and treatment is required. Conversely, for areas with only existing impervious surfaces, there may be no additional LID requirements, but adherence to the statewide trash amendment is still a must. For offsite improvements or public improvements, the table guides you through designing BMPs to handle the runoff appropriately. It may involve on-site offsets or oversizing another BMP to account for the runoff from improved areas. Finally, any
email alert
runoff
is on
from
the screen.
outside the project site should be designed to either bypass the BMP or be included in the BMP sizing. And this table, it's more than just guidelines, it's a navigation system, ensuring that every project adheres to the highest standards of environmental protection.
Hey, Scott, your email alerts are showing.
Oh, thank you, guys.
Sorry about that, Scott.
Oh, no, you're totally fine. I saw it there. I just forgot that that's the screen that's being shared. So thank you, Flannery. So this table, it's more than guidelines. It helps you find out what your project needs. And the next table, this is for projects over 1 acre. And this is just moving to larger scale developments, and the criteria for stormwater management, it becomes a little more stringent, and it's all in Chapter 2 project triggers. And then the manual, it switches and it goes into submittals. And submittals is a big one. And that's kind of where we're going to head into our next discussion. We have a little panel discussion. So get ready, Michael and Jesus. I'm going to be bringing you guys to the forefront here soon. And I'm going to ask that you both kind of introduce yourselves and explain your background and what you do. So let's start with Michael.
Hi, my name is Michael. I'm the Stormwater Program Manager for the City of Healdsburg. I joined last May. Before that, I was an environmental compliance specialist with Mendocino County, working on MS4 stuff there. And part of my role here is reviewing submittals, both the initial and final, and then making sure they check out. So I will try to answer these panel questions to the best of my ability. Might have to rely on my peers for some of the questions, but
Thank you, Michael. Jesus?
Hi, pardon me. My name's Jesus McKaig. I work for the city of Santa Rosa, and I am a staff engineer. So I review primarily entitlement projects and building permits. So I really only look at the initial SULIDs, not the final, and I also don't have much dealing with inspection. I do interface with both Flannery Banks and Nick Sudano here in the city as well. So I do have some perspective from outside of that exact review. But primarily I look at the initial SULIDs. I've been working for the city, almost 17 years. And I will also endeavor to answer any questions. And if I look like I'm floundering for even 1 second, somebody with more knowledge jump in immediately. But otherwise, I will do my best.
Great, thank you. And I really never introduced myself either. I'm Scott Sanders, City of Roanoke Park. I'm their environmental coordinator. I'm going to also kind of be on this panel discussion because I do review the initial, I do review final. So I'll be able to also add to this discussion when needed. And we're going to start with diving into common challenges that are encountered during the LID submittal process. We're going to cover topics like inconsistent terminology, unclear drainage mapping, the necessity of comprehensive submittal information. Our discussion will also touch on the importance of considering long-term maintenance, ensuring consistency in design and construction, and the need to properly address deviations in standard designs and BMP accessibility. And this isn't just about pinpointing issues, it's about enhancing our approach to low impact development. Each challenge presents an opportunity for learning and improvement. Again, when we go through this, feel free to throw some stuff in the chat if we can speak to anything more clearly. Our first one is going to be for inconsistencies in terminology used within this dynamic field. With LID projects, we have the potential to improve how we manage stormwater and design these landscapes, but at times the language we use can become a stumbling block. And today we're going to aim to explore the impact of these interchangeable terms. You got multiple people working on these features that might not be in communication, so we're going to figure out how we can all come together. So let's see here. We're going to start with, let me see, my first question. Let me get my questions up. All right. Michael, can I do this first question for you? It's kind of your role as a plan reviewer. Have you encountered situations where terms like, bioretention, rain garden, how detention basins, how if you're the architect or the engineer, are people using these interchangeably? And could you describe any challenges or misunderstandings that arose to this confusion?
yeah, there seems to be, subtle differences between certain terms in which are often used interchangeably. It's common to see words like bioretention and bioswale used interchangeably along with the term detention basin, retention basin interchangeably. What happens when these terms are used in an incorrect manner as a plan reviewer, it's difficult to determine the actual intent of the design. For example, if a plan references a detention basin as a BMP to meet LID requirements, this can be problematic for the plan reviewer to understand if the LID manual requirements are going to be met. Traditionally a detention basin stores water temporarily and then is released in a controlled environment, whereas like a retention basin stores water but is designed to retain water through infiltration. Even if the BMP is designed to be a retention basin, using the word detention creates doubt and confusion as to the intended functionality. Using these words interchangeably is not going to convince the plan reviewer that the LID requirements are going to be met. And I think the main takeaway here is that these terms exist for a reason, and it's important that in our technical design and plans that we're using these terms correctly. It helps demonstrate compliance with the requirements and streamlines the review for the plan reviewer.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Jesus, do you have anything to add to that?
And sure. in addition to just the terms that are shown like on the acronyms, abbreviations, and definitions page there, and also there are other terms that are defined severally throughout the text itself. There are some places where the terms are not necessarily defined, but they kind of, you take them out of contextual use. And what I do find is sometimes there's confusion with that, because if it's not specifically defined either within the text itself or in the definitions page, then it's kind of up to interpretation, and interpretations can vary. Also, another thing, there's a lot of confusion as to what is meant by the different priorities, and then their specific definitions kind of employ terms that are used contextually as well. And not everybody understands that which priorities you got to use, and that if you don't use those top two, then you actually have to go through a process of justification for use of the other BMPs and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, it's all mincing words, I guess, at the end of the day. So there's probably some room, since we are getting into an update, to have more terms defined therein. That's kind of something that I would think would help in discussions down the line.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, safe bet. Use the abbreviations and acronyms from the manual, right? And then hopefully our new manual is going to be even encompassing more of these terms that we can all be on the same page with. And get your plans in early, so when we do have confusion, we can send them back and get clarification. All right, our next topic, we're going to explore the significance of accurate mapping in LID projects and the challenges posed by existing conditions in compliance with design standards and the implications of project scale on tributary mapping. All right, and we're going to start with Michael. Can you describe any common issues you encounter during plan reviews that are directly related to uncleared drainage maps?
Yeah, I'm not going to cite anything or shame any specific project. But I've seen some plans where there might be there'll be several tributaries, and there'll be maybe a treatment train in one of them. And I saw one that broke up one tributary into two, even though it was part of a treatment train, and so they needed to, they had a delta capture requirement, and they had to treat 100%. And when they had broken it up, it almost looked like they weren't treating everything. And then upon a careful review, it was like, oh, they are. This is part of a treatment train, but just it wasn't the easiest thing to suss out. Another thing I see is just that there's elevations aren't always in these drainage or tributary maps. Without the elevations, you don't know which way the water's going in each tributary, and if the LIDs are functioning as proposed. For all we know, they could be just going straight into the outlet and not through the LID feature.
I agree, and I'm going to add a little to this discussion too. Just like with larger projects, like calculating values for each tributary area, it's essential to ensure compliance with our design standards. Accurate mapping, it aids in determining the contributing area, which directly impacts our runoff coefficients and calculations. So challenges, they always arise when there's uncertainty about the extent of tributary areas. And this always leads to errors in runoff volume estimates. And this is something that we're trying to get ahead of.
We had one project where there was a disconnected roof, and all the runoff from that ended up going straight to a storm drain. And then it was before my time, but they went back and they looked at it, and they were like, oh, there wasn't actually clear elevation markings in the plans. So just things like that can arise.
And if I could just add a comment too, this is Heaven with the Water Board. I'm stating the obvious, but just for clarity, it's important that this is truly an exercise of delineating the tributary area, not the tributary area limited to the property line or project footprint, because what we're wanting to make sure is calculated and addressed is making sure that the BMP or the high flow bypass structure is properly sized for the water that it receives. And so having this information, then the design the design team and can make important decisions about whether on-site run-on is commingled or whether it's bypassed. Make sure that flood control and high flow bypass are addressed, and make sure that the individual BMP, which is why you don't have just one trip area for the entire site, right? But a trip area for each inlet and each associated BFP is properly sized and designed for that particular amount of drainage that it needs to manage and treat. So again, oversimplifying, preaching to the choir here, but that's an important distinction that we truly are talking about tributary area.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, very well put. Yeah, I've seen a plan where it's just one tributary for the entire property when water wasn't actually draining like that. So I think it's worth emphasizing.
Great, thank you. All right. And then our next topic, let's see here. Okay, failure to provide comprehensive submittal information. So here we're going to kind of emphasize the significance of detailed narratives and handling sensitive features and triggers for LID development, and the importance of pollution prevention and runoff reduction measures in these submittals. And I want to start off maybe with you, Jesus. Can you share an example where a comprehensive project narrative played a crucial role in achieving LID project narrative or objective?
Well, if you don't mind, I'd probably want to take it from the other direction, just because I'm finding more often than not that the narrative itself, which is where you get the opportunity to talk about your project top to bottom, where it is, what it's about, what its full scope is, and that's often missed. I have found, and maybe this isn't one example, it's probably several kind of conflated, but where the narrative will either not address topics such as, like, if there's a groundwater issue, like it's very high groundwater, it's not in there, or sometimes the soil type won't be called out in there, or will be called out differently in the narrative than it is in actually the supporting reference documents, which is like, well, that's kind of a head scratcher. And then you got a third one in the calculator. And so which one are you really using? I have found that when the narrative does cover all the bases, I mean, if you have a creek in your backyard, if you have a bunch of trees on site, any of that, or covering like utility work in the streets, like the trenching, when it covers everything, it really paints a better picture for reviewing than the calculations and the exhibits and all that. And if they don't speak to each other, then you kind of don't have a cohesive report. And yeah, I'd say the narrative is one of the most important parts. I don't know if that answered the question. It's many examples in one.
I wanted to hear more about poor narratives. That's thank you. And I kind of want to jump in here too with the next section, the presence of sensitive features like creeks and wetlands when I'm reviewing these things. And when I encounter a submittal involving sensitive environmental features like creeks and wetlands, my role is to ensure that these areas are meticulously considered and protected. And it's crucial for developers to understand that compliance with LID principles isn't just about meeting regulations, it's about respecting and preserving our natural environment. And in my reviews, I emphasize the importance of a detailed site analysis. Developers, you guys got to demonstrate a clear understanding of how your project impacts these sensitive areas. I look for plans that include buffer zones and which are essential in safeguarding these habitats from construction impacts. And the use of native vegetation in project designs is another aspect I strongly advocate for. And this not only supports our local biodiversity, but it also helps maintain our natural water cycles. And it's crucial for these sensitive areas. And when I'm reviewing these stormwater management plans and these submittals, I'm ensuring that runoff is appropriately managed and treated to prevent the erosion and pollution to these delicate features. And that's just my 2 cents on features.
And
Hey, Scott, I wanted to add one thing. And this is something that we struggle with as reviewers, because we as jurisdictional staff don't make this call, right, on the creeks and wetlands. And so we will often comment that you need to make sure that you can get the appropriate permits. And when you hear jurisdictional staff saying, have you run this through the regional board? Have you already gone through your application process with the permitting agencies? that's what jurisdictional staff's getting at. So the cities and counties, that's what we're trying to lead you to is, hey, we think you're going to get flagged on this. You might want to pre-coordinate. And so when you do hear jurisdictional staff say this, it's because we've seen projects where the assumptions you're making were not allowed on other projects. And so it's always this tough balance where we're trying to guide you based on what we've seen on other projects, but it's really not our call as the cities and counties. It's, you know, Fish and Wildlife, it's the regional board, it's, you know, the fisheries group. And so I would just say we do the best we can to give you a warning in your conditions about when we think something might be sensitive. So I'd heed that warning, but we stop short of actually commenting you on that because it's not actually our authority. And so I will say when you hear staff saying that, we have opportunities where we can coordinate with the regional board to float a project early by some of those agencies to see what they're sort of for a temperature read. And Heaven and Katie King at the regional board have been very open to that, but we don't take that initiative unless the project applicant contacts us and says, hey, heard you speak up on this. We would like to take you up on having that initial conversation. And that way you can get that initial interpretation without having to chase 4 different designs trying to guess what everyone will want. So I just wanted to speak on that. There's only so much we can say on plan reviews because it's not our authority, but if you hear us speaking to that stuff, that's our way of trying to warn you guys that we see a potential problem coming.
Thanks for adding that, Flannery. And that is something I wanted to say here also is please understand the distinction between these LID features that we're talking about, which are required for, to address the permanent impacts from construction, from a water quality standpoint, that they can't be located in these other natural features. They can't be within a jurisdictional water, they can't be within a wetland. And if you are required to do mitigation or constructed wetlands or other features, they can't be dual purpose in that way, right? And in fact, you may need, as Scott was saying, separation from those features. And so it's important that we understand that these are different, just in the same way that they're different from construction BMPs, that we protect and properly locate and size and manage these features so that they continue to provide their specific required benefit in perpetuity.
Thank you. Right.
I'm just going to add to that. This is Walt Dragolowski. I'm the CGP lead for the construction general permit for projects that are over an acre. You're also welcome to call me or contact me with direct questions. Although I do encourage working through the city and with the city so that we can cover the multitude of aspects to the project at the same time.
Thank you, Walt. Another great regional water board resource, Walt, for everyone. So thank you for joining. All right, and we're gonna keep going. We're gonna skip this slide because we do talk about a lot of long-term maintenance in our next panel discussion, and just for some time, we're gonna just go over that one. But here we're gonna come to discussion revolving around common pitfalls that often surface in LID projects. The failure to identify and correct deviations from standard design. And this is always a crucial issue that can impact efficiency, compliance, and the long-term success of these LIDs. Jesus, I'm going to answer this first question for you if you feel comfortable with it. I have my own answer if not, but in your experience as a reviewer of these submittals, can you share instances where you've encountered deviations from the standard LID design, and what were the implications of these?
So with regard to standard design, deviations from standard design here, we're referring to like if applicants or their engineers say choose BMPs that are not either listed or differ greatly from what is listed in the manual, and it either doesn't function with the site or requires additional kind of review kind of thing. Is that what you're looking at? That happens all the time. If that's what you mean.
Yeah,
like,
I'm kind of like,
making
I'm
subtle
also encountered
changes.
like deviations in the sizing and the placement of these bioretention facilities. You know, some projects attempted to reduce costs by undersizing the features, and that just insufficient stormwater management capacity, increased runoff,
Gotcha.
and just common deviations that involve vegetation selection, and just it seems like they always deviate and they don't think we're going to catch it or something. And
That is, yeah, that's probably the biggest thing is kind of, I mean, not necessarily pulling the wool over our eyes so much, but making changes that are not addressed elsewhere or are, you know, obvious. And then you get into the review and you see that something isn't quite right. Things aren't fitting together right. And then it will often cause multiple revisions that could have been avoided if the project were if you just followed the guidelines within it and used the BMPs as intended and at proper capacity, or if it was consistently referenced within. And also with regard to deviations in standard design, every jurisdiction also has their own, or generally has their own regular storm drain standards, which do have to interface in the design with the LID standards, and those are often overlooked. And again, it's just that we're going to have to send it back and that's going to cause time for a project. And that's what none of us want. So that it does impact projects quite a bit in what I review.
This might be a little unrelated, but I mean, I can not go into it at all. But I often see like plant selection. I don't know if that's what you're part of this deviations in standard design category. I can speak to that otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go for
it. You know, just like it's generally like LID planning and design would be led by an engineer. So they have the responsibility of designing the LID BMPs to meet the requirements, and that includes like selecting plant, you know, the plants, you know, landscape architects are also involved. There might be poor communication between the engineering and landscape architect team. And oftentimes we find plants that they might be in the manual, but they're not appropriate for like, you know, high, low, mid, or they're just not in the manual at all. So, you know, that's something I've seen a couple of times. Just kind of, it's important for get a lot of different teams working on these projects, and it's important for them to be in communication.
Yeah, and when they deviate from these design standards, I mean, sometimes you're not meeting local regulatory requirements. This always leads to delays in the permitting process, additional reviews, additional revisions to address these compliance issues. And these delays always have cascading effects on timelines, and then always results in increased construction costs. So we always say, try not to deviate or be right up front, and always submit early, because things are always found out during that submittal process, and delays do happen.
Yeah, and I would say, just from Heaven's soapbox, the two most concerning of these. I mean, of course, you're going to have to look at your site, and there's going to be instances where you have to do site-specific modification. So that goes back to what Jesus said: is to use that narrative to explain that well. And the underlying piece is the modification short-circuiting or undermining the intended function of that feature? And the one that I also want to underscore, and maybe I'm speaking earlier than I should on this one, is the material placed and the porosity used in the calculations. Whatever is used in your calculation needs to be carried through all the way to design, specification, delivery, and installation, because a very small change in the porosity can substantially change the size of the feature that you need. So it's really important that, you know, certain elements have particularly large impacts on whether or not the feature installed in the real world is going to provide the benefit that it is intended to provide. And so I think that's, if we just kind of zoom out a little bit, is really the biggest reason why we're concerned with deviation, is if it unintentionally undermines the function.
Great, thank you. All right.
Hey, Scott,
Yeah,
hey, before you move to this slide, can I
Mhm.
throw a question out in the chat to the regional board? Because we didn't get Heaven's intro, but I think is important just for context.
Mhm.
So I can answer this, but I'm gonna just leave it up to Heaven and Walt maybe to take a first stab. But if you want me to answer it, I'd be happy to. But this says the new compliance requirement is really necessary. This new compliance requirement is really necessary for sustainability, but who's paying for it? Is this program subsidized by state or federal resources? If the developers are required to comply, they will pass the cost onto the consumer, the home purchaser, which will dramatically increase the cost of living in this area, which is already higher than most in the state and nation. So just, Heaven or Walt, do you guys want to just address that really quick and maybe talk about the history?
Yes, I will do my best to answer that. And I'm going to, again, be a little bit broad on purpose, because this question's been answered in many, or asked and answered in many arenas. So I'll do my best to paraphrase that in the interest here of our time. So the shortest answer I can give is that this is the requirement to do LID and to build in these, I'm going to call them mitigation measures for development, is a requirement that comes out of the Clean Water Act requirements. It comes from our mandate under EPA and Port of Cologne. And these requirements, and in some cases stricter requirements, are implemented through the NPDES, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits for municipalities and apply to developments throughout the state. So there's the statewide permits, which is for our smaller communities. It's written by State Board. It has these very similar requirements all the way through for all communities. And then all of our larger communities, like everyone here on this call, are under the phase 1 permits, which basically just means that the permits are drafted in each region specifically. But this is not a state mitigated cost. This is a environmental regulatory mandate that applies throughout the state and really throughout the United States. But California has its own permits under US EPA delegation. There are grant programs, and there have been a few projects done through that, more than a few. But in terms of what we're really focused on here today, these are regulatorily required elements associated with land development within our state.
And although we're evolving, they're not necessarily new. So our standards have actually been around since 2005.
Yes.
And this is the third iteration of that manual, which coincides with our MS4, which is our stormwater permit renewals, just for context.
Correct. And I would also say 2005 for the LID manual, this went by another name before that and was even part of the original 1997 order, which was the first order that applied and started having requirements for control of peak flow at a project scale, and requirements for treatment-based features. So as I say, this is not new, and it's not unique to this location. We do have slightly different requirements in these different orders, largely to everyone here's benefit, in order to be reflective of, local soil types and hydrology and rainfall patterns, but also on the other side of that is being reflective and sensitive to our water quality. So our beneficial uses and the need to protect groundwater, especially here in Region 1, where we have high quality groundwater and high quality receiving waters in need of mitigation and protection. Sorry, I was going to try and keep that short. I feel like it was longer than. But yes, it's a regulatory mandate that we're all working together through these trainings and through these manuals and through these permit renewals to meet and address what's required, while also providing enough technical information for it to be reasonably implemented to the best of our ability collectively here.
Great. And we love your soapbox, Evan, so bring it out whenever you need it. And then that's actually going to finish our first panel discussion. So thank you to our panel members. Michael, Jesus, loved it. Thank you so much.
Anytime.
They're all week.
All right, and then Flannery. Do you want to jump on in?
Yeah, thanks. Just takes a second to get set up. Sorry, it's always tricky to get your presentation going and still see the Zoom info. Okay. So today I'm going to be covering a few of the case studies that we have. We've done this before and it seemed very beneficial. So I'm going to run through these pretty fast, and we're just going to be focusing on what the specific site challenges were and what the site constraints were and how these projects moved through them, and some additional paths forward that we could see as staff. So it's focusing on those challenging sites where you're restricted by contamination or historical buildings or space of assorted variety. So to get going, the one biggest key to remember is that this LID is required, and when you plan for it and it's in you're giving the space for it in your 35% design level plans, your 40% design level plans, it can really integrate well, and it gives your project time to go and get additional buy-off when we need it. So an example is the contamination sites, or if you're proposing something that's a bit outside of what the co-permittees can approve on our own without the regional board's buy-in. So when you plan for this ahead, we can grab it in your entitlement process without much of a delay to the project, and it really makes a better final product, and it really locks you into what your design constraints and agreements will be. So while you do have to comply to our LID manual and its requirements and our regional interpretations of the permit, especially with the more and more infill projects that we're getting, you really need to think outside of the box and keep in mind that, while you're following our standard details for LID, you really need to be sizing it, changing the geometry, making adjustments for whatever is very specific to your site. The first project we have up is the Cannery project. So this is off West 3rd in Santa Rosa. All the projects I'm speaking to today are from Santa Rosa, and I did not introduce myself well. I'm sorry. I'm Flannery Banks. I'm one of the co-permittees. I'm with Santa Rosa, and I'm the storm drain asset manager for Santa Rosa and serve as the technical expert around stormwater and storm drain for Santa Rosa. So this is a Santa Rosa project. It's Cannery. It's a former cannery, and what you see in this image, photo credit to Press Democrat, but they had this historical facade that they were required to keep. They had very specific street requirements It was a very narrow public right of way. It's actually going to be a private street, I believe, at this point. And they had a lot of space constraints with this facade fitting in the city section. So it was a multi-story, 6-story apartment complex. So there's aerial, there's very strict fire department requirements for access on this one. There's strict street section requirements. They had to do a contiguous curb, gutter, and sidewalk. There's just no room in this area for the landscape strips, especially taking into consideration the historical building. So this is an overview of the site layout. This is really what they were restricted to for the sidewalk constraints. They had to do some tree plantings, but everything behind this back of walk is all controlled by their requirements for the historic building. So as you can see by this section, there's, I don't have too many dimensions on this, but you can see it's a pretty narrow street section. It's probably a 30-foot section, just under 30 feet. It looks about 26 feet. So very, very tight space constraints. And the project came to us in entitlement and said, I don't know how to meet our LID requirements with all these other requirements you have on the project. Like, help me find a path forward for this. So we met as city staff, and I encourage other jurisdictions to consider this, that when it's all of our regulations getting in a project's way, so to speak, I feel that it's really part of our duty of service to have those internal dialogues and try to figure out how this project can move forward. So we had an internal meeting with entitlement, we had traffic engineering, we had fire department, and myself to hash out all these different requirements on this project. And what the project ended up coming up with was a partial daylighted, partial subsurface bioretention facility. They're using trench drains to get the water from the roadway underneath the sidewalk back into this facility. And part of it's daylighted, and it abuts, portions of this abut raised planters to help with the LID and the beautification and the vegetation component. And then a significant portion of this is underneath the sidewalk. There's moisture barriers to help protect the roadway structural section and the other utilities. So they implemented these heel-proof and ADA compliant trench grates to get it behind this side back of walk. These are the trench grates they used. And this is one version that we're recommending to people when they need it for conveyance. So this helps a lot when your LID feature is going to be behind your contiguous curb, gutter, and sidewalk. You still need a way to get it back there. So this is one version that we recommend. Of course, we don't recommend specific proprietary. We are probably going to be putting some on our approved engineers list for Santa Rosa. But this is one example of the tools that you guys can have in your toolbox. To switch back to speaking about what we can do as jurisdictional staff to help the private development, another alternative that we came up with staff is that they could also do a bulb out section. Now, this would require some agreements with the city. If they were going to do the bulb out, it still needed, because of the ladder aerial reaches and the radii with the ladder, the sidewalk was going to have to be H20 load rated, and there was going to be no parking and fire lane signs posted with the mountable dike. So the idea is that the fire truck could easily go up onto the sidewalk, and the sidewalk would be designed to carry that load for the area where the LID had to be incorporated behind the back of walk. So this is another example of what we can do as staff to get people in a room to help these projects find a path forward. Ultimately, this isn't the design option they went with. They were able to figure out another way to do it. But this would have been another design alternative that the city would have been open to. Not the most desirable thing, but one way that we were able to work with the consultants and find a path forward for the project with all the different restrictions and the requirements we were putting on the project. So collaborate with your other departments when it's really city and state requirements that are painting a project into a corner. So the next one we have is Coors Court Lot. This is in the south end of Santa Rosa. And while it seems like it would be very easy to get LID on this project site, it was a little bit challenging. They had a lot of parking requirements that they had to comply with. This is another situation where the project was conditioned to add curb, gutter, and sidewalk, although in this area, we do allow it to be contiguous. But they did have a lot of site adjacent improvements by having to install that new curb, gutter, and sidewalk. The challenge they had is that we were not going to allow them to encroach outside of this geometric footprint. So they were not going to have the option for the bulb out options on the site. So they had to treat everything, including their impacts to the offsite with their on-site LID. What they developed is a pretty typical at face value looking LID. This bioretention area. I included a screenshot of the detail and the curb openings. So they used a mixture of curb openings on the site. They also have, they're also taking roadway drainage. This one, they could have used a trench plate, but they had two double small diameter pipes to get that water over into the LID for their street requirements. They also have sections of the sidewalk that had to be sloped towards the property, which is a bit unusual. So there's nothing in city standards that says the sidewalk has to slope away from the property. That's just generally good engineering. But when you're really tied on space constraints, portions of the sidewalk can be sloped back. Jesus, were you going to jump in on this one?
Oh, I'm sorry. After the fact, we did find when we were doing the street standards review that one of the standards, and it was a seldom noticed place, does require that the direction of flow or cross flow on a sidewalk be to the street. But in the standards update, we're going to make it so that it can be in either direction as long as the percentage is the same.
Yep. So that's a bit of a funky change that you're seeing on the development side, but it's getting into the space constraints and all the requirements, right? So if you're doing improvements outside of your property in the public right of way, those improvements, unless they're specifically categorically exempt from LID, you still need to provide treatment, and that can lead to challenges when you can't separate the watershed out. So you have to think of it in a way, how do I place my on-site interruption, something like a trench grate? Where do I place that within the streetscape so that I'm limiting, while I'm meeting my project's LID triggers, I'm limiting how much treatment comes in that I'm not responsible for through the permit. So another way to deal with that is orifice plates or weirs. If you're having issues separating out your required LID treatment from your total tributary shed. So again, that's a design alternative that could have been used in this situation to limit how much offsite they're treating beyond their required amounts. But you really need to outline what you're doing in your SULID report. So that's where it's really important to tell the story of what you're trying to achieve so that city staff can follow what you're trying to do. And in the future property owners understand what they're obligated to and how the design was generated. Some alternative options on this one, it wasn't really allowed because of the space constraints, but they could have done some bulb out designs around the ADA ramps, which they would have had to pull it back towards the property right of way in this case, but there was still avenues where you could somewhat use a bulb out design and hold the curb gutter line. So this would have bulbed out more into the property as opposed to the streetscape, but it would have been another option. So sitting parking lot 10, this gets into when LID is triggered due to the public roadway improvements that you're being required to do. And so while I have it written as offsite LID requirements, it's actually on site. If you're modifying or reconstructing portions of the public right of way, that's still on site for you. Offsite would be you're doing a construction project at 3rd Street and D Street, and you're putting your LID at B Street and 2nd Street, right? A totally different location is what you want to think of for offsite in some terms. So it did trigger LID in the project nature itself, and it did have these street improvements. So this was the original design, and this got flagged because of these adjacent, see, I almost did it myself. These are these public right-of-way improvements, this driveway apron, the reconnection of the pavement. This was all triggered. This was all subject to LID. What was not subject to LID requirements was the addition of this ADA ramp. So again, remember that that's a specific exemption with our permit in our region, that ADA ramps, if you're doing an improvement to meet ADA requirements, that can be an exempt task. So this ramp was exempt, this driveway and the reconstruction of the failing sidewalk was not exempt. So it got flagged in our internal review. What they ended up doing is modifying how they did the ADA approaches, and they put the bulb out. They did use a bulb out design in this. So the water flows through its originally designed gutter pan and gets into this LID, which is sized for its full tributary area. And then we do have existing storm drain infrastructure in this area. So this catch basin on the left will tie into that manhole, which is a circular thing just to the right of it for its discharge point. So that's the modification that was done. And that was specifically because of the public right-of-way reconstruction, not counting the ADA ramp that was being performed. Here's just a more detail on the piped infrastructure. So they did have piped infrastructure that they could connect to, so there was no need for it to be a flow through design. So yeah, another big thing that we are seeing missing from the engineering is these velocity dissipation pads, these cobble pads, and that needs to be a function of your velocities coming into the feature. So that's a design function. We do have some standard language around it, but we are having to comment on that piece quite a bit. And you need to specify the full footprint of it, including the depth and the size of the rock. So that's one thing that we are seeing missing on a lot of submittals. A little more information on this. So I just wanted to point out, these are things go much more smoothly in construction when you actually involve a landscape architect. So we do have a landscape architect on this contract, and they did call out the plants for the bioretention facility. So just really, you get a better project, and your future property owners will be much happier if you involve the landscape architect. Then you get something that's visually, aesthetically beautiful, not an eyesore, not one type of vegetation. So I just wanted to point out that was done well in this project. An alternative option that they could have gone with, they chose a partial bulb out with the dual ramps. This red example is what's currently proposed in the City of Santa Rosa's public storm drain standards update that's being routed for public comment. This is a detail that we're providing. Again, it's not any different from the intent or the information included in the LID manual. It's just being a bit more forthcoming for the city's desired geometry, or one of the things that we would find more acceptable than multiple small facilities when you can implement it. So again, Santa Rosa's not operating separately from the co-permittees. The details of the bioretention area would still be mimicked from what you see in the LID manual. It's just an additional reference geometry shape. We've also included the details for the curb opening. A couple sites here you can look up on your own where this was pretty well executed. I will not speak to how they're being maintained, but these were pretty nice design examples that you can grab off of this slide of where this was actually constructed in the real world. So I wanted to touch a little bit on the Giffen site that came through Santa Rosa. This site was challenging. The image you see is from GeoTracker. So this is a site that has active remediation going on either on it or adjacent to it. So this got flagged for regional board consensus or approval, right? So we have the language in the LID manual that says sites that are contaminated or have risk of contamination or jurisdictional staff believes there's a risk for contamination, these need to be floated by the regional board for approvals. We can't unilaterally accept infiltration on contamination sites as city or county staff. That does need to go to the regional board. So this project was proactive. They took our recommendation. This project went in front of the regional board, presented by the co-permittees. So the process to go to the regional board during this is you talk to your co-permittee of the agency that's reviewing your plans, and they will coordinate with the regional board to get in front of them. That's a standing office hours that co-permittee has with the regional board staff. We have the ability to meet once a month. That's the last Monday of the month, but that has to be at the request of the co-permittees. So if you go as a private consultant requesting time in that without your co-permittee, or you asking it instead of your co-permittee, the regional board response is going to say you need to coordinate with your co-permittee. Those office hours are really to support the co-permittee entity and to make sure we are on the same page with the regional board. But on occasion, and this site was one of them, we do invite the consultants to come along because we believe there are circumstances where the direct feedback straight to the consultants will be beneficial. So this project, again, heeded staff's warning. We went to the regional board at entitlement to screen this project. They were proposing a large-scale singular BMP for this project site. The project site's in yellow. The red circles the GeoTracker contamination point that was supplied. We asked to go to the regional board open office hours to screen this project. We invited the consultant along, and ultimately the regional board was okay with this design. It did have its required volume capture, and it did have a vegetated component. What was approved on this was a full plastic moisture barrier, 10 mil moisture barrier to isolate it. So this is a project that does not infiltrate into the groundwater, nor was there any intent to allow this project to infiltrate into groundwater. The regional board gave, after the office hours, the regional board followed up with staff and gave us a written email that this was appropriate for the site given contamination concerns. And then that email was included in the SULID report. So right at the entitlement phase, all this was handled. The regional board stance was documented in the SULID report with that email. So there was no confusion when the project moved forward into the engineering reviews. And it just went a lot smoother. So tricky site. It was given this exemption to fully encompass the LID feature with plastic because of the contamination. But when you operate this way with staff, it makes for a much more quick and smoother review process for projects. The final one I wanted to point out is this is on the north end of town, Renaissance Way, and this one wasn't so challenging, so to speak. There wasn't anything particularly limiting the LID, but I wanted to show you guys a good example of when LID is acknowledged that it's needed and thought out right at the initial beginning of a project. So this is a really nice streetscape. There, these bulb outs where you see the towards the left of the screen where it's coming to the bulbed section of the court, you see that the curb and gutter line kicks out a little bit and creates this hourglass look. So that's because there's LID on both sides of these ADA crosswalks. And there are 2 LID points as you head into the court on the right side of the screen. One's grayed out. This was a phased project. So both of these, the ones on the right side, are grayed out. They were constructed earlier. But I just wanted to give you a great example. You know, LID doesn't have to be this tiny annoying thing in front of every household. Santa Rosa in particular is pretty supportive of the bulb out design. It helps us with traffic calming. And I just thought this was a really great layout. And one of the results you can have when you think about it on the front end of your design and not an afterthought. Pretty seamless. It will look really pretty. City staff was supportive, and no part of this required any sort of special buy off. So going back to the whole theme of this year's training is form follows function. So it's really important to remember that while we do have the LID manual, and it does make for a quicker approval when you follow the LID manual, things like geometry or dealing with slopes to achieve your contact time, all of those are specific to every project and every design. So you don't have to think of it having to be this rectangle thing in this landscaped area between the sidewalk and the curb and gutter, right? It can have a lot of different looks when you think about it ahead. There are options for being on steep slopes. So the one I show here has a baffle system. So this is, they designed this because they were having issues achieving their required contact time with the planting. So you can add these baffled systems to slow down that contact time so you get the full contact time. You can also add stepped weir systems. So again, you don't need special approval for this. The nature of these would all be consistent with the intent of our LID manual. The sections would be really similar to our LID manual. There was just a few additional design components that had to be added either for contact time or to control velocities on steep slopes. So these are all credit to the San Mateo Countywide Water Pollution Prevention Program. And I also included the EPA site. So this is a link, and we can supply these slides after the training, but I supplied both a link to San Mateo's and the EPA's. So again, just remember that you always be required to meet our region's requirements and the intricacies of our interpretations. One example is that we do not currently allow a tree well that has no vegetated grasses to count fully as your vegetated component. So that would be one example of a way that we differ from other jurisdictions, other regions. But these are also great resources for ideas if you have specific site constraints. For the weird system on steep slopes, I'll just add that depending on the soils you're on, in the city, those seem to tend to be the Golding Cobbly loams. We do have pretty significant concerns about slope stability. So you'll need to work with your geotech, and you may be required to give a stamped letter from your geotech that the infiltration will not create slope stability issues. So again, if you have handled your LID on the very front end of your project, you can plan for this. And when you're working with your geotech, you can make sure that commenting on the LID or infiltration will not create slope instabilities. They can incorporate that into their geotech report. So if you know you're going to be in those steep slopes, 10% or greater, especially in Santa Rosa, the Golding Cobbly loams, you might want to start including that in your geotech scope because that is something that city staff or county staff may be looking for if we have reason to believe that area is subject to slope instabilities. But again, if you deal with it in entitlement, then we can move through it pretty easily, and you can incorporate the space needed into your site design instead of spending a bunch of money on the back end for redesign during engineering. So that, if you guys have any questions, I'm just trying to bring ideas to you guys and be forthcoming and transparent with some of the things that we've been open to accepting and have accepted. yeah, we don't just accept rectangles. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
It looks like there are a few questions in the chat. So Zach Ruiz with Adobe Associates asked, when you have bioretention directly next to the road as shown, doesn't that require the perforated pipe to be below the road section, which requires the depth to be significantly deeper? I think that might have been the Giffen site, Flannery.
The Giffen site, it's a pretty large feature, and they had all the moisture retention built in. The Giffen site, so that's not such a concern with the Giffen site. The other sites, really the perforated pipe is governed by what your design. It's ultimately a engineering design choice of what your volume capture is, how what you've proposed is draining. I would say that governs more than anything in the detail. I will say that we are, especially in Santa Rosa, we do not allow our utilities to interact with the LID features. So you may need a beefed up curb and gutter depth, depending on how close to that road section you are. And you may need to do moisture barriers to protect the stability of that road section. So yes and no, like a lot of things in LID, but hopefully that, and I can follow up if that's not clear. But that would generally be my answer on that one.
And then we have one other question. Why do tree wells with tree plantings not count for treatment?
Ooh, Heaven, are you still online? I would default to you because I've tried to push this one through, and I know you and I are still trying to maybe you don't view it as this way, but I'm still trying to work with you guys on finding some in between on that one.
Yeah, so first let me clarify that there are kind of two different pieces that could be considered tree wells. So there's a regular tree well, which is, an urban tree planting feature. And, may or may not be part of an LID, bioretention area, for example. So tree planting isn't prohibited. It just needs to be intentional and thoughtful and consistent with the design space and intended function of that feature. So BMPs can include trees, first of all. Then there's tree well and tree plantings that are completely separate, right? So you may have a plant tree requirement just to meet a city standard. That's not what we're talking about here. I think that Flannery, what you were referring to is kind of the proprietary tree box tree well. And so those do exist. They are typically what I'm talking about is it's kind of a tree in a box. There's a what we call a high flow media. Usually it's proprietary. Sometimes looking at like 100 inches an hour flow rate through. And so again, those aren't wholly prohibited, but they're going to be part of, they're on the, we're looking at the prioritization, they're in the proprietary category typically. And there's a lot of work actually being done in Region 2. There's a whole subgroup, working group on these high flow media. And there is a bit of concern with them for a lot of reasons, or not concern, but additional information needed to make sure that they're properly used. Because we want to make sure that, and I'm saying we as the royal we here, that what we're not getting is infiltration of untreated stormwater. We want to make sure that we're meeting the criteria of LID. And I will also say, just anecdotally, in my experience, the places where I have seen these tree wells installed, often the plants don't survive well. And that's been an issue for ongoing maintenance. So we lose the vegetated component over time. So these features right now aren't necessarily prohibited, but they don't necessarily fully meet the requirement of LID either. They may need to be part of a treatment train is the way that we look at them.
Yeah, so just for clarity, I pulled one up and we're not saying this is bad or good. It is a proprietary one. We're not recommending them. We're not recommending them. But just to give you guys a visual of what we're talking about. So if the tree well filter that I have displayed on my screen had these grates opened up and they had the grasses component, you would get full credit for both the vegetated component and the volume capture, assuming that you sized the well itself to be sized appropriately for your volume. So a modification to this is that you don't have as much concrete, you don't have the grate system, and you have the grasses in there as well, in addition to the trees. But this alone, with just the trees, you would not be meeting your vegetated requirement.
Right. And like I said, they aren't prohibited because there are situations where they can be very useful as part of a treatment train. You know, when we're looking at high flow rate media, one of the things that it can do is, you know, provide trash capture in addition. But it does also require routine maintenance so you don't get resuspension. So it's a little bit more site specific than just, yes, these always count, or no, they always don't. So sorry for the nuance there, but a lot of what we're going to talk about is it's nuanced, and here are some of the common factors that get discussed in that nuance. I hope that helps.
To address Karen's question, it just depends on if you have hit that 10,000 square foot threshold, if LID is required. And we are not saying landscape architects are required or make sense for every single project, but from 13 years in private consulting, when there's a landscape architect already on the project, on the contract, you and your client are going to end up with a much more aesthetically pleasing and easier to maintain LID facility if you involve that landscape architect in the LID component. And so, to make fun of myself, as an engineer, I would love to just give everyone rectangles and call it a day. That would be very satisfying to me, with one grass, and it never changes.
Hey, the one nuance here, Flannery, is if the LID is existing, then yes, you would be required to comply with the LID requirements before. So if you wanted to add an ADA over an LID, you would need to come to the city to try to find an offset for the LID that's been installed for that particular project. And that is the nuance there. And so the way you phrase this, it looked like it was more from post-development than a pre-development. And so from that standpoint, the 10,000 doesn't count because it's already installed as a result of the 10,000 trigger that was conditioned for development.
Agreed. And so what I was talking about on the landscape architect, while engineers love to do that, you're going to end up with a superior product. You're going to make sure the irrigation requirements are established so that you don't get hit during warranty for failed LID. It really makes a better product. And if they're already contracted for the project, it's really better off to have the landscape architects assist you with that layout. So yes, the civil engineers will have to provide the calculations, the space requirements, the volume requirements, and the engineering specifics. I cannot strongly suggest enough to involve your landscape architects if they're on the contract.
And just one last note on that, I don't mean to belabor this point too, but the way that I try and think about it, and I try and talk about this, is in the same way that you wouldn't go through your preliminary design without thinking about parking. You shouldn't complete your preliminary design without including your architect and thinking about the LID feature design. And I would also caution, you can have a really thoughtful, intentional engineered design that meets all of the requirements. And if the landscape architect is not on board all along, you could have them inadvertently short circuit or undermine, like we've talked about, that intended function by putting in a wall instead of, a swale, or putting in, making significant changes to planting species, for example. Similarly, out in the world, Our landscape installation can also cause significant issues with placing things like floatable bark in large quantities or flattening out swales or depressions that were intentionally and carefully designed to provide a benefit. So making sure that we're communicating with everyone working on that site all the way through that process. It's going to save everyone time and money to not have to redo or undo work done by our landscape laborers out in the field.
Another comment you might see come from city or county staff regarding trees is be mindful of the design of your LID facility and what tree you're proposing to put in. So if you have very shallow perforated pipe, city staff is probably going to comment that they want information on the expected mature size of that root ball. You know, if your perforated pipe's only 2 to 3 feet underground and you're proposing trees in your LID feature, we're going to comment on the concern of those tree roots clogging that perforated pipe. Now, if you're using a tree like a 2 to 3 foot fully mature tree system, something like redbud that's on the tree plant list, and your perforated pipe 6 or 7 feet down, you know, then you're probably okay, because we aren't going to have the same concern of that root ball destroying your perforated pipe. So, you know, it's nuance, right? And we're looking at the design and its functionality as a whole. So I will just add that additional catch for trees and why you might get comments back from city staff on them. And another way that landscape architects can help you end up with a good design. That's all I got. Doesn't look like there's any more questions for me.
Great. We're gonna take a break. We're at break time, halfway through. So everyone, we're gonna meet back around 10:15 and we will continue with our panel discussion, our next panel discussion. I will share that screen and get it out there for everybody. There we go. See you all in 10 minutes. Some of you. So we're gonna wait a few more minutes. Heaven with the water board's gonna come on. She's gonna speak to some things she wanted to speak to, and then after that we will do our panel discussion.
Hey, while we're waiting for Heaven, I thought I would clarify a point. You know, as a construction general permit lead, when I invited people to speak with me separately, I just wanted to clarify that, you know, they should always go through the jurisdiction unless they have individual questions specifically about the construction general permit.
Thank you, Walt.
Hi all, sorry, hitting back.
Welcome back. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for making the time today. I'll try and touch on a couple of things briefly. I wanted to let you all know, I think it's been alluded to, but that our phase 1 permit, which is the permit that dictates LID here in the Russian River watershed, is up for renewal. So anticipating, we're working on it internally at this point, and anticipating that it'll be brought to and adopted by our board this next calendar year. And in that process, it will come out for public comment and renewal and review in that renewal process. So there are some components that we're anticipating revising related to LID. And so I wanted to touch on those with the preface, of course, that we're in internal draft. It's going through legal and all of our internal review, and then it will go out for public comment, and we will take and respond to comments received. So that's all of my preamble. I think the biggest change that I wanted to identify for all of you here is the anticipated change from the threshold of 10,000 square feet of new or replaced impervious surface to 5,000 square feet of new or replaced impervious surface. This would be consistent with the phase 2 permit, which is the statewide order, which covers all of our small cities. So we're looking at consistency with that. In fact, our region's 10,000 square feet is one of the largest or more lenient thresholds at this point. So we can anticipate that change. And it just means that more projects are going to need to think about and implement LID. Aside from that, we're going through kind of adding a fair amount of clarification and specificity to help with clarity on a lot of the points that have already been discussed today. Things like separation distance from features such as contamination or wastewater, leach fields, things like drinking water wells and separation from groundwater. Making clearer some of the exemptions, for example, full depth reclamation work, and making sure that we explicitly say that the LID features and the infiltration resulting from those features can't cause harm. So in Region 1 here, we actually are really fortunate that we have really high quality groundwater. It also means that we work really hard to protect that quality of that groundwater because it's a really valuable resource, and protection is so much easier than getting it back and remediating. So really making clear that it's the infiltration of treated stormwater that is prioritized and intended. And again, just the importance of the LID features to provide that treatment and infiltration. And then there's a piece here, which I'll bring up briefly, just about the tracking and maintenance. Again, we talk about the threshold reducing, we're talking about more of these features existing. And so the task of making sure that they're properly maintained and that maintenance is tracked and that we know where these features are and that they're fully functional becomes more important. So there's definitely language in the permit to make that clear. It's also consistent, as I kind of stated before, we're under EPA authority. And EPA is specifically putting requirements into permits for asset management. So we're kind of just looking at building those requirements out a bit more. So it's important that we look at how these features function, where they're located, and how we make sure that they continue to provide benefit over time. Some additional contemplation, and I know some of the cities here are already talking about it, for offset, and I'll use the term loosely, but banking, and looking at multi-benefit projects and ways to manage those and track them. So again, that's from our side, we're kind of writing the regulation, wanting to make sure we include some of those. So I just wanted to take a moment and bring that up, that we're going to be making those revisions, changes. There'll be a public process, and it will be going before our board this next calendar year, 2024. As I have more specific timelines, I will be in communication, and public noticing will happen once that is ready to go out to the world. I'm going to pause there. Is there a question? More questions?
I think we just want a clarification. We're just gonna assume everywhere where it says 10,000 in our manual, that's gonna go to 5,000. Someone's asking new or replaced. I'm assuming it's gonna be new and replaced in pervious areas. Everything's the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the same criteria, but with a smaller threshold. Okay, couple of Heaven's soapbox items before I have to depart this meeting a little bit early today. Sorry for that. Just wanted to take the opportunity since I have you all here. A couple of them we have maybe touched on briefly. So just the importance of understanding the triggers, understanding that your project needs to think about LID from the very beginning. The sooner you think about it, the easier it is to implement. Flannery did a nice job of illustrating that for us here today. That's going to be true. Also, you know, if you have a project that's going to need a 401 permit or might need Cal Green, there are other ways in which a permit or a project may need to implement LID beyond what just the MS4 permit requires. Making sure that your plan submittals are complete and that all of the design elements are shown correctly on those design plans, right? Because the calc reports, while they're very, very important to everyone here, aren't what the contractor is looking at when they build these elements. So making sure that your design plans truly reflect the ultimate design and are consistent with what was calculated to make sure that you were compliant. It's really important. And I already mentioned that the soil and the porosity of the soil or media placed in these features is critical. If you thought that when you did original calcs that it was going to have a 25% porosity and you put something in that's 20, your feature's undersized. So really thinking that through all the way. Making sure that we understand that there's treatment and then there's volume and then there's trash, and that might mean a treatment train or it may not, depending on what's possible on your site and what type of BMPs you're looking at. But again, thinking about that from the beginning. That maintenance is important, both in terms of maintenance declaration and making sure that it's clear and readable and recorded so that it runs with the land. And making sure that, so that's one piece, and then making sure that it's possible, right? So if you're locating features in a place that the equipment that might be needed to maintain them can physically reach, or what kind of temporary road closure would need to be done to get that vac jet truck in, or to get that crew into a medium, you know, a median in a road, right? So thinking through the practicality of it as well. Being
Kevin,
really
I'm just gonna add on that overhead utility easements are not appropriate places for LID, even though utility is overhead. It's a permit obligated requirement, and PG&E needs to be able to get their H20 heavy trucks through, and there's not a chance that bioretention soil is going to support any of our trucks, even a pickup. So just sorry, adding that in. It can't be in the utility easements.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that. And that's another piece too, is when you're thinking about what else is crisscrossing that feature that might actually reduce its capacity to hold or infiltrate that stormwater. Fire hydrants, streetlights, standards, driveway aprons, right? So things like that, you just need to be mindful of the detail. And the sooner that you can do that in your design process, the better. Groundwater, both in terms of protecting it and making sure that we have the separation, but also the separation so that you have your capacity that's not taken up by groundwater. Water flows both ways, depending on what we're looking at. Vector control is an issue, making sure standing water isn't breeding grounds, making sure that we're doing that. And then one other piece, and I'll let you speak to this a little bit more if you want to, or later on if there's questions, but you know, LID is also a requirement of the construction general permit. So understand that if you have a CGP site that happens to fall outside of the jurisdictional requirements within our cities here, within our city and counties here, that if you have a site that's going to require CGP coverage, that's another way that you're going to be required to do LID. And because the CGP coverage comes so late, right, it's right before you're breaking ground, I just want to flag that for people to think about, that even if you're outside of this physical boundary for being required under the MS4 permit, you could still be required to implement that. And it can be disastrous to your schedule and budget if you don't realize that on the beginning of your project design. So I just want to underscore that. Similarly, we're also not able to terminate that CGP coverage with your NOT if you were required to do LID and you can't show us that that was designed, built, and is installed and functional to provide that benefit. So we're having to hold projects under the CGP because that's a standard requirement that we have to check in order to terminate your site. So I just want to underscore those. I think these are things that might get missed, and it could be a really significant impact to our projects out there in the world. And I want all of this to go as smoothly as possible so it becomes part of our standard processes. And I want you to understand too a little bit of what the water board is held to as an agency. So that is a standard requirement we have to look at in the same way that LID is a standard requirement we have to require.
I will add, for jurisdictional staff, we have had circumstances where an exempt project still triggers CGP, but not LID. And that's through utility exemptions, emergency processes. There was a few emergency projects with the COVID-19 emergency. So for jurisdictional staff, just call Walt. You know, if you're a project engineer and you run into that and your consultant flags it, you know, just there's paths forward, but you'll need to call Walt and work with the regional board directly. But if you are a consultant, flag that for your CIP, whoever your CIP is for, flag it that they are going to need to work closely with Walt, because when the regional board knows it's coming, they can work with you and confirm your determination, confirm that you are exempt from LID, and they will help you navigate the SMARTS requirements, because you have to do things a little bit differently in SMARTS for that. So it's very rare. We've only had it happen once in Santa Rosa, but it comes up.
Yeah, and I don't bring these up because they're the most prevalent, but I think they're significant when they do happen. And I just didn't want to lose the opportunity to share with everyone on the call today some of these pieces. I will also say, you know, vegetated cover, you know, these features, the vegetation is part of the infrastructure and is a vital part of the infrastructure. So, you know, we're looking at, you know, 51% planted at establishment. I don't want to see, if I see all rock and two sprigs of grass, we're going to have to send that back to you for vegetative cover. I already mentioned floatable material, right? We don't want that's a problem on two fronts. We don't want it to be a pollutant source in its own right when we get high flow. We also don't want it to lose its functionality by now having a roadable surface exposed. I'm sure I could think of more soapbox issues. I'm gonna just put one or two more here, and then I'll pause and hand the presentation here back to the regularly scheduled programming. The other ones I really want to think about too is remember to consider, you're going through this design process for your water quality event, our 1-inch rain events. Don't forget to do your second pass and look at what happens with your hydrology and hydraulic flood control rain events, right? We don't want those features to be susceptible to damage from those events. You may need to bypass, harden, have a high flow route, right? Think about how those function when we're getting a 10-year or higher rain event through them. And another piece of that is, you know, just making sure that everybody when they're doing the construction understands the nuance and making sure your plan sets are clear, putting all of those LID BMP details onto one sheet, making them really clear and readable, making sure that that matches your calcs, making sure that if you need, like, for example, the flow line of your high flow bypass needs to be 6 inches higher, making sure that that's carefully noted so that a contractor doesn't inadvertently fix something that wasn't broken.
If this is my opportunity, Heaven, are you finished?
I will pause right here and then, but maybe before you go ahead and start, were there any questions on the fire hose of information I just put out? No, yes, okay. I did see a
There are
que-
questions in the chat for you, Heaven.
Okay, I was trying to look at those.
Some of them are for Walt.
Okay, let's see, what's here for me?
The last 3 are for you or Walt, either one of you.
Okay, I think I
Take
might
it away.
not updating here. Hold on. Would someone mind reading back the ones that are for me? I'm just not, I don't think my computer is updating the chat.
So I think I'm going to skip Kevin's question just for the interim while you've got the helm, because I think Walt can answer that one.
Okay.
But Zach asked a good question here, is he's not had a chance to explore in depth, but does the CGP provide the calculation it uses for sizing bioretention, and is it consistent with the Santa Rosa LID requirement? So I guess that is a good question, is what do you refer people to if it's just a CGP triggered LID?
Got it. Yeah. So the short answer is there is the state board. So the CGP is a statewide permit, which means it's written and issued by a state board, and each of the regions are charged with implementing and overseeing the compliance with it within our jurisdiction. That being said, it includes, and the state board includes, kind of an LID calculator base that can be used. We also will accept the design calcs consistent with the LID manual we've been discussing today. And similarly up in, the Humboldt area, or where our phase 2, our smaller communities are, they have their own LID manual that is consistent with their requirements for that phase 2 permit, which are slightly different. So the option exists to use either. Now, whichever jurisdiction you are in, so I would say that's the state's perspective, either are acceptable. Whatever jurisdiction you are in, whether it's the county of Sonoma or within one of the cities, for example, although I think in most instances, if you're within the city, you're within the MS4 jurisdiction. So you're not going to be in that category of being triggered by the CGP. But the county, for example, may require that you design per the LID manual that we've discussed here today. But from the state's perspective, either can be submitted through SMARTS.
Well, that's a good segue, and I don't know if you're going to have an answer for this one, but I'm going to throw it at you anyways. In rural areas, i.e. the county, within the MS4 boundary, some consultants have been informed that they're not required to do LID if the project does not discharge to a county maintained facility. So is that correct? And what criteria determines whether the facility is county maintained?
Yes. So that is something that we have been engaged with specifically with our legal counsel to make sure that we fully understand and can be really accurate in what's required. So what I can go back to and give you confidently is the definition of the MS4 for the MS4 permit to apply, is that it is the drainage and conveyance system owned and maintained by the municipalities or agencies named. So there may be portions of the county, particularly, that do not drain to a county-owned and maintained public infrastructure under the under the MS4. Now, those particular properties, I think they're the exception, and they're something that we're trying to better articulate and understand in this permit renewal process. If you encounter them as a permittee under this permit, reach out to us, and let's be sure that we're sure from it as close to project inception as possible. Because there is, as I say, also other triggers and regulatory requirements, such as the construction general permit, which may apply and require LID, even if it's determined that that particular parcel or development is exempt under the MS4. Similarly, a 401 permit could also, if required for that project, say they're installing a private storm drain system with a new outfall, LID would still be required. So it's very much going to be, I think, a case-by-case evaluation at this point for those exceptional parcels. But the definition is accurate, that the MS4 permit applies to the MS4 conveyance system and those that drain to it. Did that answer it?
I think
Okay.
you did.
Thank you for giving me a little bit of time and space in your otherwise very full discussion. I really appreciate being included, and for your time here and everyone on this call's attention to these really important stormwater elements. I will throw one more not fun, but point that I think is so important is the more we learn about pollutants of emerging concern, like what's coming off of tires and killing off our endangered species. What we are also finding is that the only type of treatment that has been shown to remove those pollutants are LID treatment, bioretention. And so the value of these types of biological-based treatment devices is continuing to be demonstrated. And you know, the importance of these being included in projects and the value that they're showing in protecting our sensitive species is just so important. And the more we learn, the more important we're finding that they are. That's a whole other side note and could be a separate presentation at a future date. But it's really amazing to see the benefits that can be provided.
Thank you, Heaven. And thank you everyone for your questions. This is meant for all of you. So I create questions to help guide the conversation, but if you guys want to replace mine with yours, we welcome it. So please ask away and we will direct our conversation to your guys' questions. But in the meantime, if not, Heaven, if you have no more to say, we can continue. Walt, I'll give you a second if you have anything to add.
The only thing I was going to add was that when you file your notice of termination request, I will need to see photos of each of the LID features. And people are sending me photos and I usually have to return them back to ask for additional photos showing the LID feature, seeing the vegetation, seeing that the offset for the overflow bypass is appropriate, so that I can properly document that we have met the criteria that are required. So just a heads up, please include those photos when you submit your NOT application so I don't have to return them.
I am adding a screenshot answering a different question on that, but it does have a recommendation of what can be turned in for your NOT documentation for LID that will lead you to a very fast review by the regional board. Again, it's not a requirement that you do it this way, but the more clear that you make it to any agency staff exactly what they're looking at and exactly what was constructed will speed your approvals.
Answer someone's question. I don't think there's any requirement of uploading these things to Smarts Vault that show like whoever's approving those LID features at the end. There's no kind of requirement that gets uploaded to Smarts.
You mean as in a document that you submit saying they have been approved? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think someone said, who exactly ensures that LIDs are built properly as designed and are acceptable prior to NOT approval? Is there any official form to be filled out so it can be uploaded to Smarts?
Right, and the answer is no, there's no official form to fill out, but I will always contact the jurisdictional agency. So please go through them and make sure they're going to come out and take a look so that when I call them, they'll know that they were built and constructed properly. And then I'll make sure that the documentation for photos has been uploaded to Smarts. And I'm interested to see what Flannery has for us. Were you going to share that, Flannery? You're muted.
Sorry, I was taking a screen capture. I'm just loading it as an image into the chat so anyone can just
Okay.
grab it and download it.
Great, thank you.
Again, that's not a requirement, but it helps both inspection staff, city or county and regional board understand what they're looking at, and it can speed your approvals.
If from an MS4 standpoint, the engineer of record actually gives a certification that they were designed in accordance, that also could help with your smart submittal. And since you're already creating it for the MS4s, it's not a bad idea to upload for Walt to see from the smarts perspective.
That's true.
Great. I'm going to share my screen again. And we will continue with this next panel discussion. All right, everyone can see it. I hope. Okay, here we go. And I would say Brianna, Leslie, Oscar, Aaron, you guys can get ready. We're going to do some introductions here. And so for today, we have a panel of some experts in the field of low impact development. And I'm going to start with some introductions. We'll start with our landscape architect from Carlisle Macy. Brianna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I just wanted to say hi. I appreciate you calling me an expert. I don't know that that's entirely true, but I do feel like I spend a lot of time digging into the nuances of the LID manual and how we can improve our landscape designs to meet it. And I'm happy to speak to that today.
All right, and next we have the Director of Ecological Programs for Circuit Rider, Leslie Scott. Would you like to introduce?
Hi, thank you. Yes, we're a nonprofit that provides job training to young adults who are interested in careers in natural resources. And one of the projects that we have an opportunity to work on is the maintenance of some of the LID features with the town of Windsor. So we do that as part of our workforce development program and have the opportunity to work closely with the town of Windsor staff to learn how to maintain these features and pass that on to our crew.
All right, and next we have Oscar from Cervantes Landscaping. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. I've been a contractor for 3 years now, and previous to that, we were a landscape maintenance company for 15 years. I think in those 3 years, we've installed around 50 LID features, the bulk of them being this year.
Very nice. All right, and the last person of our panel is from Santa Rosa. He's an environmental specialist, Aaron.
Hi, yeah, I'm on the Stormwater and Creeks team for the city of Santa Rosa, and I, along with one of my coworkers, Angie Daniel, who's on the call, we work on implementing our NPDES permit, and a large part of that when it comes to LID is doing LID inspections, and that's post-construction or post-acceptance. I kind of see it in two ways. There's like the post-acceptance LID inspections that we do annually, and then we also are integrated into our building and engineering department to do pre-acceptance inspections. So as they're being constructed, and we'll do the 50%, 75, 100% inspections to make sure everything is according to design. So that's a big part of what we do.
Great, thank you. All right, and I want to encourage anyone to throw some questions in the chat if you want something specific, and if someone can answer it, someone will. If we can't, we'll get back to you later with an answer. But let's begin. All right, and as we delve into this next slide, so it all starts at the beginning, but I want to talk about how do we ensure long-term success in our LID projects. And a lot of these key issues, from the challenges that surface post-installation to the gap between ideal designs and on-the-ground realities. So through this, we're going to examine how guidelines fare against actual maintenance practices and kind of look for solutions that can help endure the effectiveness of these LID features, as well as the aesthetics. So I'm gonna kind of just jump in. Brianna, you're gonna be our first questions going to you. And I kind of want to talk about, in your designs, how do you ensure, or do you even ensure, that these LID features can remain effective, and not only effective, but attractive over the long term?
Sure. My control over anything is really just in the design up to the punch list when construction is finishing. After that, I really don't have any control and am often not involved in a project. That's where it goes over to the owner and the maintenance team. What I do in the design process is choose plants that I think will thrive in the environment that they're located, and try to provide proper soil prep guidelines in coordination with the soil that's required for the LID feature itself. And I think we can communicate with our client the design and the purpose and the intent of the LID features. And we can use our experience in designing landscapes in urban spaces or rural spaces where people are interacting with them or near them to help guide the location of those, which I think can contribute to their success. And again, just being really thoughtful in the plant selection. After we sign that certificate of completion that's required for WELO, people don't usually call us. I wish that weren't the case, but really we just have to do our best to do something that we think will thrive, and hope that the people who take over it know what they're doing and are understand the purpose of all those features.
And you mentioned WELO. That's an important thing in this kind of LID features. Can you maybe give a little broader explanation of WELO, which is Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, for all of those that don't know?
Yeah, so WELO is a state mandated requirement. It dictates a water budget for a project, and then it prescribes planting and irrigation design requirements. So the water budget's based on a percentage of annual rainfall adjusted for evapotranspiration in the city where the project's located. And the design requirements are meant to encourage low water use plants and efficient irrigation systems for water conservation. So landscaping in the state of California has to meet these water conservation requirements. So that's just like the certificate of completion I mentioned is something that's required for occupancy in a building.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to make sure my design meets the MWELO requirements. I have to check that the landscape contractor installed it per my design. And then we have to layer LID requirements on top of those requirements.
And when you're designing these plans, do you create maintenance guidelines for your LID features, or is that something that's created down the road?
No, the perspective, at least of my office, is that the construction documents are meant to help a contractor build a project. It's not meant to guide long-term maintenance. Landscape maintenance often gets written into conditions of approval. Sometimes you have to provide a vegetation management plan. It's also a requirement of WELO, but it's not often something we're asked to prepare for a client. Yeah, I see some landscape architects put some maintenance requirements on their plans, but that's not really the intent of the construction documents that we're preparing. The maintenance, I'm not going to say the right name for it, but the maintenance document for LID features is usually prepared by the civil engineer. And we're not really involved in that, but I think we should be.
I agree. A lot goes into the maintenance, and that's why we're gonna kind of like go to Oscar and Leslie, because maintenance, I mean, these LID features are great, but you come back 5 years later and they look nothing like when they were installed. Because maintenance is usually, like you're saying, kind of forgotten. You have engineers creating maintenance for plants, and they're not necessarily experts in that area. So Oscar, I'm going to kind of send this over to you. Can you discuss what common issues you've identified in the long-term health of LID features?
Sure. I've seen overgrown plants that are just planted way too tightly in the bio. For example, you'll have a grass that can grow 3 to 4 feet tall by equal width, and they're being planted every 16 inches on the bio. Sometimes they overcrowd and can suffocate the other plants, so you'll have some dying, some doing well. Another thing we've noticed is during the establishment period, homeowners or developers don't really understand that you have to provide supplemental water that the irrigation gives. So you can't just rely on the irrigation for that establishment period. You have to provide supplemental water. I get lots of callbacks after we install a project that the plants are dying or something, and it's just lack of water. You have to water during that establishment period. After that establishment period, you can cut the water back. But most of the common issues we've noticed is overcrowding and irrigation.
All right, and I want to jump in here too, because I'm reviewing these maintenance plans. And Aaron, maybe you can speak to this too. I'm not sure how much you review the maintenance plans, but a lot of people, they tend to just like to copy the description that's in the manual. Like, oh, you only need to maintain prune once or twice a year. And they just pretty much, I see, get that stuff copied into their maintenance plan. And that's always a red flag for me, because like you just said, Oscar, the first year or two of establishing your plants is vital. So I'm always telling people to top heavy that. And then after that, your maintenance plan will definitely go down. Aaron, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I have that same sentiment when I see just like copy and pasted maintenance plans, and we'll probably get into it too, but also like copy and pasted details just straight out of the LID manual. Those drive me crazy too. But yeah, kind of what Oscar's going off of a lot of people need to understand that, yeah, these are native plants and they're drought tolerant plants. So people hear that and think, okay, never water them, don't worry about them, but they need to be tapped in. They have deep root systems. They're acclimated to these Mediterranean climates, right? Wet winters, cold, wet winters, long, dry, hot summers. So they're acclimated to that. That's once they're established though. That's really what we're looking for. So depending on the plant, obviously, but usually we look at 3 years for establishment. So that's obviously one of the main issues. And I think it's just, for me as an inspector, it's just talking to people and having them understand that these are really extensions of our storm drain system, right? It's like there's catch basins, there's drop inlets, and then there's roadside bioretention, but these are living, breathing things, right? The maintenance is specific to what you have on your property, and they're living, they're breathing. It takes constant maintenance to make sure that these are functioning properly.
And the way they should be written, I think even the manual kind of says they should be written that someone, maybe not with Oscar's expertise, but could come and read this manual and have like a good idea on how to maintain the LID features. And when you're saying just check for dead plants once or twice a year, that's not going to help someone maintaining these plants. Having specific ideas of what plants are there and their maintenance needs are vital for these maintenance plans. And I want to bring Leslie in right now too. I want to see if are there any specific maintenance practices or routines that you have found to be particularly effective in preserving the health and performance of LID installations over the long term?
We're very fortunate in that we have, the town of Windsor's expertise and in trainings, both in the field and in the office. And then they also provide us with a guide, a maintenance checklist that we follow. And it has 11 items that we know we have to learn to identify, and then possibly treat or correct based on what we've seen. So we can follow that checklist, make sure that, first of all, our crews are able to identify, the LID feature in the first place. So we start with that, and then how they function, what they should look like, and then going through this whole list and documenting all of our maintenance activities every time we work on a feature, with a checklist, with photographs, with on a quarterly schedule. We know where some of the trouble spots are, and because we're in Windsor, we're able to swing by there occasionally and just double check and make sure everything looks okay. And sometimes, something you worked on a month ago now suddenly has some large overgrowth that someone has noted, or that we've seen, or it needs to be treated. So just really, I think following this guide and making sure that we're hitting all these points on a regular basis, and even sometimes more than quarterly.
And we have in the chat, Aaron, can you speak, or I'm going to also speak to this. One of the let's see, we have Christine. One of the reasons for overcrowding of plants may be to meet the 50% coverage requirement. I know there's ways around that, maybe putting mulch and stuff, but do you have any other options there, Aaron?
Yeah, I was just responding to that too, but yeah, I absolutely agree that that's one of the overcrowding issues, is the meeting the 50%, but that's where having a great landscape designer who understands the plant palette they're choosing from Appendix F, and understanding, are these plants that, what are they going to be at mature growth? Some plants are designed to be shoulder to shoulder with other species, some are not, and they're going to have die off or overshading or overcrowding in their root system. So it's just understanding the plants. And I know that kind of creates this nuance with that 50% coverage, but knowing what species of plants you should use to create that 50% coverage and can have that overcrowding, or are you implementing plants that really don't want to be shoulder to shoulder, and then you really need to know how you're going to be doing that spacing within the bio.
Aaron, can I ask you a question? I think I've asked you this. I asked you this a few years ago in a training, but the most city codes require on a planting plan that we put the plant symbol at full growth. So if a plant is going to be 3 feet at full growth, we show the symbol at 3 feet. When it gets planted, it's a 5-gallon plant that's only 6 inches wide, 8 inches wide. The 50% coverage is that by a 50%, when a grass grows 3 feet wide, it's covering all of the ground around it, but it's not going to do that until it gets established. So that's I think the confusion is, if you are being told you have to have 50% coverage over the ground at the time of installation, but you're planting 5-gallon plants that are only 8 inches or a foot wide, it's impossible to get 50% coverage unless you overplant. And then you end up, Oscar has to deal with it when he goes into maintenance, because now everything is too crowded. So I think that's the confusion, is as designers, we're doing 100% coverage of an LID feature often with plant symbols filling up the whole thing, but it won't look like that until, a couple growing seasons later. So I think that's the confusion, at least that I have.
Yeah, when I go out and inspect, I have that, I go out with that understanding too, and knowing that we'll give 3 years of establishment. It's, plant full maturity or 3 years of establishment. So we inspect to that criteria as well when we go out there. And Nick, I see you're here, if you want to chime in and add anything to that.
I think you got it, Aaron. And I think just to be, I'll air our own laundry as municipalities. We probably need to be in better alignment on this, on how each of the 10 municipalities on this permit inspect. But in Santa Rosa, we do inspect, and we will allow for the 50% not to be there when it's first put in, given that it will, when plant maturity occurs, as long as it's within 3 years. And that's the requirement in the LID manual, requires mulch or stabilization when you don't have that 50%. So the manual is recognizing that as well too, even though that's not universally discussed. And that's where I think we could probably do better from a municipal inspection standpoint in supporting you guys with that. But that's that is that component of that that goes into that.
I'll
Can
just
I
add,
Oh, go ahead, Flannery.
on larger construction projects, that's really a place where an experienced construction manager, or if it's a CIP, the scheduling of how you do your construction. So I've had projects when I was on the private side that I was managing, and because of the establishment clause, granted you have to protect these facilities if you construct them early on. It does work out well if you're going to have some challenges with plant establishment. So I had projects where we put in LID very early in the construction process because we were able to water it and get plant establishment with the on-site water tender trucks. And so by the time the construction sequencing was complete, we had full plant establishment. Again, it was a large project, multi-years, but it is something that you can consider is, you know, do you want to start trying to get that plant establishment early on? Does it make sense for your site? Are you going to be able to protect it during the rest of the construction? Are you going to be able to control the subs not damaging the facilities?
This is Elizabeth. Hey, the other thing that I see in regards to this is that when you plant less than 50%, you have a lot of bare dirt or mulch areas. And so there's an important component here is that there is some erosion control until those plants are established. And I think that's part of one of the reasons that they tend to plant more is to control the erosion. So as long as you have a cover, whether it be mulch, whether it be a coir fabric or something that can control that erosion, especially on the slopes of your LID feature. That's where it's really important that if you don't have as many plants, that you do have that erosion control.
Great, thank you. Great contributions. All right, so that was a good discussion there. We're going to move on to our next slide here. So it's going to be, so effective landscape design, it plays a pivotal role in creating sustainable and aesthetically pleasing environments. However, there's always certain issues and misconceptions that persist within civil design and the engineering community, and these always impact the landscape design. Right now, we're going to try to talk about the challenges and shed light on how we can kind of bridge the gap between different disciplines to make more effective LID implementations. So my first question is going to you, Brianna. What things do you see from the civil design and engineering community that create landscape design issues?
I think probably one of the biggest things is we're trying to fit a whole lot of things into too small of a space. And, you know, some of that is because that's what we're left with. If you've got a project site and a client who wants you to get X number of units and the code says you have to have X number of parking spaces, and then you have to have joint trench, and then you have to have amenity area and sidewalks that are meet ADA, you're left with not a lot of space to fit everything. And that includes the utilities, the LID features, and then the planting. So trying to fit too much stuff in a small area is something that's very challenging. I think sometimes as a result of that, we try to fit LID features into the tiny bit of landscaping area that we have left. And then we're trying to make them deep enough to get the volume capture and the freeboard and all that stuff. So you're ending up with something that has really steep sides to get the depth, but it's in a 4-foot space between a sidewalk and someone's patio, and then I'm supposed to put a plant in there that will survive. It's difficult to try and fit all that stuff in there. And then I think just generally the idea that it's very easy to move. Oh, there's a tree here, but I need to put an LID feature there, and I need to move this, I don't know, this utility box or something there. Can you just move the tree out of the way? It's not just easy to just find a new place for a tree. I know it's just a symbol on a plan, but there's a lot of thought and intention that goes behind those locations, and often a lot of planning ordinance requirements. So I find that to be a challenge. And I will say that one thing that is helpful about the recognition of the importance of plants in the LID features is that it gives us something to fight for to keep landscaping in a project. So I do appreciate that we have that ability. But yeah, it's a lot of challenges to try to meet all the requirements, and then also fight for your profession. Like, we need plants not just for LID features, but also to enjoy our natural habitat and improve the space that people are living and playing in.
Great. And with these LID features, they use specific plants, and these plants have specific properties that absorb certain pollutants, and these plants kind of differ from your normal landscape. And Oscar, I kind of want to bring you in. How do you and your crews, how do you guys recognize and properly care for the different types of LID installations? And how is the knowledge, like, how do you guys gain knowledge on the difference between LID features and your normal landscaping that you do outside of LID features?
Well, to determine an LID feature, we look for a few things. That would be cobbles at the curb cuts, cobbles at the daylighted pipes. We look for that bioswale material. We look for an inlet above grade, and also the slope. There's going to be a slope or a pit in the ground. The difference, we don't really differentiate in the way we care for the plants versus a traditional landscape. It all depends on the plant type and the client's needs. You'll have clients who don't want to see a single strand out of place, so that's going to require constant trimming of the plants. If for example, the bio includes a lot of grasses, the grasses tend to get unruly and out of place, so that's going to require constant trimming. You also have clients who really don't mind and they want the plants to just do their own thing. At that point, you kind of just let it be. Do what you can, make it look good.
All right, thank you. And Leslie, I have a question for you. So we were talking earlier in the presentation about soil health. Someone asked about the organics. I'm wondering, how do you approach soil health and fertility management in LID areas that you
Well, I think we're unique in that we're not a traditional landscaping service, so we don't necessarily do this kind of work in other areas. So we are looking at it. We do a lot of habitat restoration, so we're very familiar with native plants and those types of environments. And I think for soil health and fertility, we're just very mindful about using the required bioswale soil when we need to add soil in the feature. But we don't do any fertility treatments or anything like that.
And then this goes to you, Aaron. When these maintenance plans aren't being followed and you're coming out, like, how do you handle situations where either the design lacks specific details or things that were important for your inspection that aren't there? How do you deal with all that?
I mean, ultimately, I have, if I don't have much of a maintenance plan or much of a guiding document, I've got to follow the LID technical manual and make sure that it's meeting the intent of the manual. That's first and foremost with that. And a lot of times it's just meeting with maybe the landscaping staff on site and just working with them simply talking about LID, educating them if they're not aware of the difference between, you know, a roadside bioretention feature and then the adjacent planter strip that doesn't have anything in there. And just educating them on that. You know, a lot of the issues I see with maintenance, if a landscaping company isn't aware of LID, over mowing is one of the big ones I see, which makes sense because you want to mow things low to extend that time to when you have to come back and do that manicuring again. But over mowing, especially with our perennial native plants, that can lead to higher mortality rates because they're not really, you know, like think of like a juncus species or some sort of rush. Those aren't really meant to be continually mowed over. Eventually they'll start to die out, and those are some issues I see. So it's really just working with the landscapers out there on site and just talking with them and walking the site.
Which just shows that a detailed maintenance plan right in the beginning that
Totally.
explains exactly what you just said that can be given to these people that are fixing these and repairing them. And it just helps when that maintenance plan is really descriptive for everyone involved. And especially someone's asking about homeowners, you know, it's something that they need because you're talking about not even a landscape, you're talking about a homeowner who just, you know, only has a lawnmower, and having a maintenance plan that they can follow definitely helps improve their LIDs. Thank you, guys. All right, moving on, we're gonna discuss kind of, what's going on? Crucial aspect of design, how we balance the technical, the practical, and make it aesthetically pleasing. This is a very big challenge, as you spoke to it, Brianna, where engineers are coming, they just want to put you in a box. Flannery, you just want to put us all in rectangle boxes, and maybe Brianna wants us to put us in beautiful circles. And now it's balancing both of those things. So how do you prioritize, Brianna, the requirements of LID under the technical design manual and the feasibility of it, but also providing general aesthetics as well?
Well, I'm pretty lucky to work in a office with civil engineers. So if we're working on a project together, you know, I rely on the civils to give me the box that says this is the square foot of treatment area I need. And then they allow me to manipulate that. So if I need to change the shape of it or move it or shift it, as long as I'm staying within the, you know, the watershed space, I can do that. It's a delicate balance. I spoke to it earlier, but you know, the aesthetics often are take last place for all the other things that we have to meet, and also for the plan reviewers. You know, I'm sure you guys you're trying to meet the requirements of the manual, which is very technical, and you're not necessarily thinking about the aesthetics. So I think we try to get creative with the plant species that are on the LID list. You know, I would like to see more plants on that list. That's probably a different topic, but
and while we're on it, I kind of just want to, we're going to move forward a little bit too, because with time, I kind of want to get to that plant list because it's very important. And we just kind of touched on it. In the appendixes, you have these plant lists, and they go into great detail on where plants can go in your LID features. A lot of the heavy lifting has been done for you already. This plant list is extensive, but we still get other people asking, can I use plants that aren't on the list? And we can maybe talk to that. But another big thing with these plant lists is they kind of tell you high, mid, and low zones. You start getting a lot of that kind of lingo. And Brianna, would you kind of speak to the high, mid, and low zones of LIDs?
Sure. I think the intention in theory is that the low zones are the bottoms of features, like shown in this graphic, which I think is great. That can tolerate inundation of water. And then as you move up in elevation in a feature, the idea would be that as the water is draining or infiltrating, it has less inundation for less periods of time. I think LID features have to drain within 72 hours. So anything in the bottom of a feature would need to tolerate, you know, being underwater for that period of time and having saturated soils. That being said, I don't think this graphic is in the LID manual, and I don't think that high, mid, and low is explicitly defined in the LID manual, and that's, I think, would be a helpful update. And yeah, and then I think that there might need to be some more comments on the how the inundation of a plant that can tolerate saturation and what kind of features it's used in and what those zones are. I don't totally understand how those boxes are checked. I would love to provide to be part of the conversation. I think that would be that definition, I think, would be a lot helpful for people, because right now it's a little confusing.
And that's exactly what we're trying to get as regional partners. We're trying to get your guys' input on how we can make the next manual even more clearer. That seems to be the common theme, is we just make the manuals clearer. We're not really like adding a lot of extra standards, but it's just making the wording clearer for people and everyone involved. And these, I think, are in like an owner's maintenance manual that is on the Santa Rosa website, but it's not in their LID manual. As you said, when I was doing this presentation, I even looked up mid, high, low zones. You can't even search for it really in the manual that gives you a description. It just tells you kind of like bioretention uses these zones. So we'll definitely take that into account. Yeah. Let's bring our landscapers back into this. Oscar, is there anything managing the integration of native plants in these LID features? Are there challenges dealing with native plants in terms of maintenance?
No, not that I've come across recently, but as Brianna
And that's
said,
why we use them.
as Brianna said though, you kind of come into trouble when you plant a native plant in the low zone, because these plants don't like to be, as she said, inundated. They'll suffer if they're in the low zone, for sure.
And it's just important for the person maintaining them to know plants, right? Because you get an invasive plant, someone's like, oh, look at this beautiful plant that's now in the LID feature. They might just think it's there, and then they come back months later, and now that's the only plant that's in the LID feature. And just understanding plant species is very important.
If I can just chime in too on that, while we talk about, and we do focus, in our Appendix F has these mid, high, low zones, but another thing to take into account, and that's where, having experts like Oscar and Brianna out there and Leslie, you need to understand your sun shade tolerance too, because I've seen, we're planting these roadside bioretention feature, it's asphalt on the left and concrete on the right, and the sun really heats up these zones, and I've seen it where you planted, type of carex species, these creeping sedges that maybe want to be in more forested areas, in meadows and in shaded creeks, and then they just get cooked too hot in the sun. So it's understanding that as well with your plant selection.
Agreed. Leslie, anything with the high, mid, low zones that you want to touch on?
No, I think I agree with everything. We typically think about high, mid, low zones when we're replanting, and we know, okay, well, the juncus is going to go here, and the mid zone has maybe the yarrow. One thing I think about when I'm looking at the high zone and we're replanting, typically that's kind of where the woodier species go, and I do try to maybe stay back from the sidewalk a little bit so that those bigger woody things aren't going to grow out onto the sidewalk and somebody's going to brush up against it or break off a branch. So that's, those are kind of the layers when thinking about these zones.
All right, and going away from the zones, we're going to go to beyond mulch. So we're going to kind of explore materials specified for soil stabilization, reasons behind these, and the impacts. So Brianna, do you typically specify the type of mulch that is required for soil stabilization on your details when 50% establishment cannot be achieved at time installation? Or have you ever recommended any other materials besides mulch?
Yes, we typically are specifying mulch predominantly because it's required by WELO. That's 3 inches of mulch is a requirement. where we've run into issues is when you do have say you've got a rain garden or an LED feature that's kind of incorporated into a landscape area. If you put mulch in there, even arbor mulch, which we say is supposed to be non-floating, will float up and like clog a drain. So we started not showing mulch in LID features and instead trying to specify rock, something that's really won't float. The issue is that often in construction that gets value engineered out by the client. It's seen as something that's not necessary. And landscape gets value engineered out all the time, so that's not a surprise. But yeah, where we come and find a balance is that we put cobble around the drain inlets, and we put obviously cobble at the energy dissipators and other places it's required. And then we just try to plant stuff that will really fill in that space. Yeah.
Thank you. And that is a big thing. Budget considerations are always a big thing, but then they're not averaging the maintenance that's going to be required to like fix the issues that they're causing at that time. So that's something to be proactive, and everyone involved understanding that even though it might be an upfront cost, it's going to save money in the long run. And those who are doing the maintenance might want to be involved. If it's a different owner that's going to be taking over this, they might want to know that you're now value engineering out rock, and you're just going to increase my costs later down the road.
Hey,
So
Scott.
yeah.
Hey, actually really appreciate that comment, Brianna. And I agree, all mulch floats. What I would just tell this group is that if you do specify mulch, please specify arbor mulch, because it has the greatest ability to lock, and it minimizes what floats away, even though it eventually will. And in addition to kind of the solution that Brianna mentioned, sometimes you can put additional cobble or rock around the overflow or drain inlet, and then that'll hold up the mulch, but it's just going to require maintenance. And that's stuff that would need to be written into a maintenance plan for the homeowner or the business owner to understand that frequent and periodic maintenance to get the mulch that's been tied up into that drain rock could then be maintained.
Thank you. And Aaron, can you speak to mulch and bark? How many times you've had to have people remove bark at all if you run into that? And
Yeah, it's one of the most common things that takes a feature out of compliance is the floatable bark, and we've talked about it a lot. I mean, Brianna's 100% right. We say non-floatable, but arbor mulch does float eventually too when it gets so saturated. And Oscar and Brianna and Leslie were talking about that too. But just armoring the inlets with rock pad dissipators and surrounding the high flow bypasses really helps too. So
great.
Can I make one comment? This is Elizabeth. Yeah, we thought we had a good idea where we'd put just rock just along the flow line of the longitudinally in the bioswales, and we thought, oh, that's great. It'll kind of hold down the mulch. It'll allow the water to flow. It kind of slows it down. But then we found a really big problem when we went to maintain it, is trying to take all this rock out to apply more mulch, that it became a real problem when we went to deal with that. It took a lot of time and effort to actually take all those rocks out. I find this issue to be one of our biggest long-term maintenance issues. So it's something I think we need to work on and find better solutions to.
I agree. And unless anyone has another comment on that, that's going to wrap up this panel discussion with time constraints. So we're going to just say thank you to our panel members. The next section we have is kind of some frequently asked questions. We want everyone else that's part of this. This is going to be your last chance to start asking us questions here. We're going to go, Ashley's going to jump on. She's going to start her frequently asked questions slides. And again, in the middle of any of them, if you have other comments on the questions we're bringing up, please don't hesitate.
You're muted, Ashley.
Yeah. Okay, can everyone see my screen for the 2023 frequently asked questions? Yes, okay. Very good. Okie dokes. So go to the next one. So the overview and format for this section is really geared towards kind of, it's supposed to be interactive. That's the way it was designed. And really what it is the teaser for a bunch of FAQs that we are hoping to post, which will really help everyone with their LID submittals. And it goes over a lot of stuff that typically comes up while you're going through your LID design and all that stuff. So it's really geared towards being a big help for everyone that's going to be working on that. So for the purposes of this presentation, we have already selected the questions. There's 10 in total. The answers have been preliminarily approved by the Water Board. And again, the overarching goal is to have this larger FAQ document. I believe there's currently 52 or 53 questions on there posted for everyone in the near future. But for right now, we've got 10. And the way the format I have going is that we're going to go through and review the questions and then ask for feedback. In the interest of time, we might not get to all 10, but that's kind of where we're going. Okay, so the first question. What are the LID BMP priority groups? So the answer, we have 6 in total, and they are dependent on different kinds of features. So priority 1 and 2, these are ones that you don't need to apply for any kind of exemption for to your stormwater manager, municipal manager, or the board. And the big difference between the two is that priority feature 1 is designed without a perforated pipe, and priority feature 2 has a perforated pipe. Both are small scale, vegetated, infiltration based, and both designed to conform to both delta volume capture and treatment requirements. Priority 1 features are designed to eliminate all surface water within 72 hours to prevent mosquito breeding. And priority 2 is a little bit different because it is designed with the perforated pipe. So this is supposed to be installed in a high treatment area as opposed to at the bottom of the feature to ensure that the delta volume capture occurs in the area below the perforated pipe. And then once the volume below the pipe is filled, the additional flow will be collected by the perforated pipe. And so the filtered stormwater will be conveyed via the perforated pipe to the storm drain system. Priority group 3, again, anything below priority groups 1 and 2, you're going to need to communicate with your stormwater municipal manager and or water board in order to get an exemption, as they went over this in the 2022 LID training. So if this is kind of confusing, I think that it would be worth it to go through and review that 22 training as well. But this one, these are designed not to infiltrate the volume of stormwater, and the impervious area is generally not greater than before the development. So this really should only be utilized in cases where infiltration is not possible or permissible. So examples include ground contamination, high groundwater, slope instability, or redevelopment of previously developed sites. This needs to be designed with a moisture barrier lining, and the LID needs to be designed with perforated pipe at the bottom of the feature to ensure drainage. And then we've got groups 4 and 5, designed to achieve either delta volume capture or treatment. So this applies to both. The priority 4 are landscape based, and features may also be infiltrated based but not vegetated. And features are part of a treatment train and sequence of other BMPs in order to achieve both objectives. Examples include tree filter units, modular wetlands, or infiltration trenches without vegetation. And then priority 5 features, again, these are either going to be either delta volume capture or treatment, but not both. Physical structured units don't achieve volume capture, and these are not landscaped based features. Features will be used as part of a treatment train in sequence with other BMPs to achieve both objectives. And these features may also be appropriate for high pollutant generating land uses that require pretreatment, such as chambered separator units and trash excluders. And then priority group 6, this is our offset program. So first of all, in order to even qualify for utilizing this one, you need to make every effort to address all stormwater requirements on the project site. Treatment of runoff or water quality flow needs to be met on site and needs to be present in all tributary areas, even when offset for volume capture is allowed. Trash capture measures need to be outlined in your design, and the offset can only be considered when one of the following conditions is present. So the project's proximity to geotechnical hazards preclude infiltration. The proposed BMP locations puts its proximity to a contaminated groundwater site that infiltration poses a risk of pollutant mobilization. Site constraints that prohibit the ability to infiltrate stormwater due to shallow groundwater and or depth to hardpan, or other criteria proposed by the governing agency and approved by the water board executive officer, and also compliance with delta volume capture is not feasible. So those are all the different priority groups. So I guess in terms of asking for feedback, really what we're trying to accomplish is are those answers in depth enough for if someone were to be had a question and go to the FAQ, would that answer your question if you were like, well, what BMP priority am I in? So those are kind of, in terms of framing the discussion, that's kind of the different the feedback that we'd like to hear, if any.
And that can be now, or of course, if you got to read that later, you know, you can send us feedback later too, because it was a lot of information, but we are open for feedback now. We'll write it down or just let us know later.
Okay, well, I guess we'll move on to the second one. So the second one, if my requirement is delta volume capture, do I need to provide a calculation for treatment? So treatment is always required in design. However, a separate design treatment calculation is not required for priority 1 and 2 BMPs that achieve 100% full volume capture. And priority 1 and 2 BMPs assume that volume capture provides the appropriate level of treatment required. If delta volume capture is the requirement, both delta volume calculation and treatment calculations are required for each tributary area. Currently, this does require a separate calculation with the approved stormwater calculator. Yeah, so I guess we could just save feedback for the end. Maybe that would kind of expedite things so we can just kind of get through as many questions as possible. And then Scott, I can't see my clock, so I'm gonna rely on you. Let me know when we're getting close to time, okay?
Yeah, and again, this is kind of also the area for open discussion from all of you as well. So we're gonna do FAQs until time is up. So if you have any open discussion, feel free to cut Ashley off and interrupt her, raise your hand, and we can answer your questions now. Or we're just going to continue these FAQs, and then we will be done with the presentation. So this is your last 22 minutes. If you have anything you want specifically asked right now, to say it. Someone,
What, Scott, you're muted.
sorry, someone wants to go back to priorities, Evie?
Okay. Which one?
Are we allowed to ask questions like this, or should we just put them all in the chat?
Oh,
No,
ask away. Yeah.
Yeah, I just find it confusing, these priorities. Like it strikes me as a little bit convoluted in terms of which ones to choose for your project. So are you always trying to fall into the priority 1 and 2? And what happens, let's say, like obviously infiltration is the first, but what happens like in several cases around where my soils, my native soils just will not infiltrate? Like if it's a type D soil, I mean, I've encountered that on several occasions. So how do you deal with it?
Is there anyone that wants to answer that on here? Because my overarching is if you have soils that don't meet these capturing requirements, that's when you're gonna have to put a different soil in there that does. And that's what our huge issue around here is we have a lot of clay soils that don't infiltrate well. So when these features are created, a lot of other soils, sand is a big one that comes in and helps this filtration occur.
I was just gonna add to it, usually what will happen is because you're getting the lack of infiltration, you can't account for that in your capture. So usually it will require you to up your volume, your hydromod. So the volume capture component is usually where that's gonna get impacted. But yeah, you have to exchange out enough soils so that you're meeting the infiltration and the retention component. And then that's the best you can do. And I will add that there are some sites that we don't want infiltration. They're a bit more of a one-off, and we can help you navigate for that approval or an exemption from the regional board. That's not something that we can independently as co-permittees authorize. We do have to take that to the regional board. But an example would be a singular home rebuild, like glass fire rebuild, and they're adding an ADU. That would be a circumstance. They have 25% slopes. They are on soils that are known to have slope stability issues, and that project was able to get an exemption for the infiltration component. But they still had to provide treatment and control their contact time for the water, and they had a hydromod component to the idea, but the infiltration component was removed for that specific site. So it depends. Contamination is another one that the project's going to need either an approval for an offsite offset, which has to come from the regional board, or an understanding with similar to the Giffen site where a liner, the LID feature was completely lined, which prevented that infiltration component. So again, that's not something the co-permittees can authorize. We take that to the regional board and we'll get you a response. Usually we'll queue it up for the board, and then they will respond that they are okay with whatever exemption or whatever design was submitted to them, so that projects have that like hard confirmation and paper trail from the regional board.
Thank you.
Okay. Perfect. Did we go over this one already? I think we did.
Yes, someone asks, why does delta volume require the additional calculation? Not my strong suit, so if someone on here can answer that, or maybe we can get back to that question offline. And I'm guessing you're talking not only the delta volume calculation, but the treatment calculation, Evie?
Probably. We'll get back to you on that. Okay. So moving on, what is the typical value for BMP soil porosity within the required LID calculator? Typical value depends on project proposal and type of LID. For structural soils consistent with Appendix F, recommended porosity is about 30%. 30% is also a typical value listed. For assumed value for compost and biofiltration soil, making it a good starting point for preliminary calculations for non-structural biofiltration soil mixes.
On that one, I would say, I just want to add that if you're claiming something that's really significantly different from what we normally see proposed as the porosity, we may ask you to provide proof for your porosity value. So when we're typically looking at that 30% and you come in and claim, 60 or 70% with the same media that everyone else is claiming 30%, we're going to ask you to supply the backup data for your claim.
And what is required to properly demonstrate depth to groundwater? So data can be obtained from government maintained public facing data portals with groundwater results within about a quarter mile of the project site, and groundwater data needs to be averaged from at least 3 separate rainfall years with average or greater than average regional precipitation. And let's see, we've got another one here. Depth to seasonal high groundwater level needs to be evaluated prior to selection of BMP. So that's key. If seasonal high groundwater exists less than 2 inches for 2 feet from the bottom of the selected BMP, a portion of the calculated capacity will be used up by the groundwater. A high groundwater table may limit the use of infiltration-based measures. And in areas with known groundwater pollution, infiltration may need to be avoided as it could contribute to the movement or dispersion of groundwater contamination. And a list of contaminated sites can be found through the Water Board's GeoTracker program, which is linked here. And I can go ahead and drop that in the chat if people don't have that. Oops. Right. And then we also have data sources to help with that. So the State Water Board has their GeoTracker program, which we just mentioned, and the California Environmental Data Exchange Network. So we can definitely drop both of those in the chat before we leave. I'm assuming you guys are just going to jump in here. So I'm just going to move past the feedback and question slide. So again, if anyone has any questions, just please stop, raise your hand, just, or just jump in there.
Ashley, someone wants to go back to the first slide on groundwater.
Okay. The dinosaurs graphic.
They just want to see the dinosaurs.
Yeah, I know, right? It's all questions.
He might be looking at it, he might be typing. It looks like Zach might have a question about it. Oh, he's good. Just good information to get.
And what is the intent of final LID letters, and what are the inspection requirements and milestones? So the engineer on record will provide certification and supporting documentation that the LID features have been designed in accordance to and are constructed and functioning per the current LID manual and approved LID specifications. The engineer will complete a final inspection at minimum and certify that all BMPs function with the intent of the approved design. And the engineer on record will additionally include batch plant certification and or a geotech report from a registered engineer or geologist for placement of soil mix. And certification will provide information describing soil mix in conformance with design standards. And the certification will be provided to the governing agency prior to issuance of the final acceptance. What design requirements should be taken into consideration regarding long-term maintenance? So features need to remain accessible and are intended to be installed, maintained, and remain in perpetuity. Features should not be altered, removed, or abandoned without express written authorization from the Water Board. If major service and reconstruction is required, heavy equipment accessibility will be accommodated with the site design. So as people have been saying throughout this entire training, when you're designing, keep maintenance in mind. It's very important. And what is the preferred submittal for the LID? Stormwater LID submittal cover sheet needs to be submitted to ensure submittal completeness, as there are multiple components. Needs to include the design manual, date, version, applicant information, project information. We kind of reviewed a lot of this through our panel discussion. So I'm not going to really go too in depth into this. Your LID cover sheet will include everything that you need. Your narrative, as we've expressed before, needs to be very consistent with what you're expressing on your cover sheet. It needs to include your description of your existing site, proposed project type. You need to include your pollution prevention plan and reduction measures, and description of all your runoff reduction measures, your types of BMPs proposed, and your maintenance plan, which actually needs to be specified to your LID. And also you need to designate your responsible party, because that question has been coming up in the chat too as well. And then also you need to include your exhibits. So you need to include street names, property lines, storm drainage system to include inlets, waterways, title block. You need to include existing condition exhibits, soil types of the existing sites, and proposed tributary areas for all proposed inlets, and the existing impervious area, if any.
Hey, can I ask a question at this point, that last one?
Yeah.
I'm really curious on, since we have a lot of the engineers here, how they would feel about if we required all the LID features to be shown on a separate plan sheet. We find it very difficult sometimes to find those and find all the details on separate, the plants are on one, some of the details are on another, the numbering system is on another, and we found it very difficult. It would really be great to all be on one, just kind of how the SWIPI, all the BMPs are shown on one sheet, on an erosion control sheet. Is there any comments that I could get from that on being able to show all the LID features on one plan sheet?
You have my support.
Right. I get it. Totally doable.
I believe that's what we do already.
Okay.
I'd say it generally helps a lot in construction. It's something that design engineers have typically felt that they have sufficiently addressed, but it's resulting in smoother construction and proper construction of the facilities when all the items related to the facilities are on one plan sheet. I'll also note for the city, erosion control sheets that are included with the plans are permanent erosion control generally. And because I know this has been a question that seems to come up quite frequently, the design engineer should be designing the permanent erosion control, and we expect those to be included with improvement plans, at least in the city of Santa Rosa. These are different from the site construction BMPs, which whoever is involved in your SWIP or your water pollution control plan, they're developing those. Those are not the same thing as your permanent erosion control. Sometimes they can be, but that's not necessarily the case.
So it almost sounds like there's three, right? You have a temporary for during construction, you have final, and then you have all the LID. Is that what you're saying?
There's just been some confusion on the erosion control sheets that are to be included with the IPs. So, I'm not saying that that's different from LID. There's just been some confusion where temporary erosion control gets shown on the erosion control sheets with the IPs. And so think of your IPs erosion control as permanent and your SWIP erosion control as construction BMPs.
All right, temporary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a clarification that keeps coming up.
And I'd say stay tuned, because we don't typically see them all on one sheet, even though you guys have the capacity to do that. And I think there will be clarifications that you see that will come out probably in the next iteration of the manual. In fact, there's a document that's being reviewed by the board that may come out prior to that manual, but we would obviously give you notice if that were to occur. But that would be one of the changes Casey, I hear your point. We do probably want some better coordination between the civil and the landscape architect. It's something that we see as an issue that comes in after the fact. And it tends to create issues with final approvals. And so that might be worth having a discussion to talk about that, but we probably want to address that as well. Just so that that's upfront and not being designed or aesthetically planted after construction has happened, which is pretty typical from the landscape architects that aren't involved in the beginning design process for LID.
Okay, thanks everybody for that.
Yeah, Ashley, I know you might have more, but I think we're gonna maybe wrap things up unless we have any final comments or questions.
I had a quick one if I could. This is Kevin. I'm with Advanced Stormwater Protection. We're a local consultant, stormwater compliance consultant firm in Santa Rosa, mainly of CASCWA certified QSD, QSP, and such, and help clients through the CGP process. Although that segues us perfectly into the LID realm after the NOT gets approved. So, we're very familiar with the fact that we have to be CASCWA certified and water board approved to inspect construction activity. Is there anything that might be coming down the line that would require someone to be equally as certified in the LID realm to go out post-construction and ensure that after all of this, money and expertise in the design and in the build and the installation and in the final approval right prior to it going into the perpetuity, that the owner be required to find or seek an individual certified as such to come perform regular inspections to ensure these features are, because we get a lot of comments, yeah, I got a guy who cuts the grass and blows and mows and blows. Well, that's, as we know, they're the experts on these features. So we're involved in this. We're trying to help, but we often find that when it's not required, but more so, your option. I was just curious if that's anything that CASCWA was looking to get involved with or create a training or a certification for that would give the public, someone to go seek a consultant that could help them more so than the landscapers of the site.
I'm happy to chime in on that one. So, Kevin, I recommend you reaching out to CASCWA to ask for that. Yes, we would love to see that happen. Right now in California, there's not a program that would provide that certification, and the onus would fall on each individual municipality, which is just too great of a burden. You will see some guidance or some light guidance come out in the FAQ once we post those. They will tell you some of the things that we could have someone do once we see visual observation of BMPs not performing, which would kind of go in line with what you're talking about, which is in alignment with an ASTM standard for infiltration permeability testing. So we are headed in that direction. There currently is no requirement, and any requirement currently passed down would be a burden currently on our municipalities. But I do recommend maybe reaching out, and if you have the industry behind you, having the industry reach out to CASCWA to see if they develop a program like that.
Absolutely.
Scott, this is Reg Cullen. Could I ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
In the content for this format, there was to be a live demonstration of the water quality calculator. I think that was dropped. I'm just wondering why.
Yes, we updated the agenda to remove it. It just what were our reasons?
You could tell me anything, just not enough time.
It's a little of both. So one is focusing on energy. We know that we're gonna retire the calculator out. We know that there are some clunky problems with the calculator that I'd say most consultants at this point have figured out how to operate around. And so we do understand the desire, just knowing that we are going to sunset that version of it out. we decided to spend our energy in other places, but we hear the frustration on it, and hopefully within a year and a half or so, we will, as soon as we have permit requirements, all the co-permittees have already put together all of our buy-ins for the manual update. And part of that's addressing the calculator. And just giving the consultants the calculations. So you'll have two avenues. You can either run the calculator for standard projects, or you will have the approved equations from the co-permittee group to run your own. So heard, understood. That's why.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Evie, do you have you have a question?
Can you hear me okay? Okay. So that my question was very much in the same vein. I think it could be really beneficial to have sort of a formal training class, not even for certification, but for consultants like myself who are designing these things, to just really be able to pick your guys' brains about the calculator and about whatever equations, that kind of stuff. I think would be really helpful. And I wonder if that's in the cards or has been thought about at all.
To make the calculator more approachable has definitely been thought about, and I think that's what the main thing we're going to try to do with the new one is make it more universal and easier to understand, and involve more things. So we're trying to take everyone's input. Please send us emails outside of this with your exact input, and we can definitely try when the time comes.
Hey, Evie, one thing I just would recommend is maybe you want to send your email address to Flannery. When we do get to that calculator update, we probably will want to reach out to the design community, at least to a select group of folks, to kind of just litmus and just make sure we're addressing all the pieces that need to be addressed in that. And if you are willing to kind of support with that process or to be engaged in that process, we'd love to consider that. As far as training and maintenance, yeah, we're considering that. I agree. Right now, I would just tell you that Clean Water Association up in Washington actually has one of the better programs that I've seen for maintenance, and they actually do certification in Washington. They're a little bit ahead of the game, a little bit above us. But I just wanted to kind of throw that out if you're looking for something in the near term. They use a little bit different terminology, but some of the concepts and the maintenance is very similar to what we would do here in Northern California.
Regarding the comment for the template, that's something the co-permittees have thought of. It would help both, I think, the consultants and our own city staff as reviewers, right? Anytime you standardize what something looks like, it helps us increase or reduce our review time on it. Elizabeth, I feel like we've touched on this a year or two before. I think Windsor has something that gives you some more standardized framework. So you're welcome to use Windsor's template, what exists of one, with any of the co-permittees, really. We would accept, it has all the good stuff that you're required to have in the SULID reports. And we've talked about getting some example sheets over. Nick and I've actually worked on some comments for good, thorough LID information on plan sheets that will really help. It was actually a request from the contractors that they asked jurisdictional staff to be more prescriptive on what is supplied on engineering sheets in regards to LID, to make it more clear to them so that they can construct it properly the first go around. The barrier on that has just been our own bandwidth and contracting. We do have some funds available, but we don't have staff that can do some of the drafting for that. We have to contract out for it because of bandwidth issues. So I will say there's definitely a desire to standardize these and get you guys some templates. It's honestly been a bandwidth challenge. So contacting Elizabeth for that Windsor form is the best we have right now. I can't make promises, but we are trying to get some templates together, even for things like drainage reports. The city's looking at getting some templates together. Of course, if we do provide a template in a more formal way, we'll probably run it through the co-permittees and make it, adapt it to be a regional one. But Windsor's, good job, Elizabeth.
Well, backspace that, we have not finished it. We drafted it, but we never finished it. We did to get templates for our maintenance plans. We have templates for our DOCs and what everything needs to be in there. But we don't actually have it for the SWID lid. I'll go ahead and make sure we finalize that and get it up on our website here probably by January.
Thanks for being ahead of the rest of us on that one, Elizabeth. We'll gladly ride your coattails.
All right, and Evie, you can contact me. You should have got my invite email, and I can spread the word when you with your comments. And if there is nothing else, I just want to thank everyone for joining. That was a nice 4-hour presentation, and I enjoyed every minute of it, and I hope most of you did as well.
Fantastic job, you guys.